Skill, a powerful energy gathered in the guy's hands. Monsters, a huge monster stood in front of the protagonist. Suddenly, he jumped up. Battles, the protagonist jumped high above the enemy. Suddenly, his body was cut into two halves. And death, both pieces fell heavily to the ground. There was no life in the protagonist's eyes. In a dim consciousness, he heard a familiar mechanical voice. The system notification reported that the character died and the mission failed. The cashier stood behind the counter and punched gum. It was the protagonist. Raising his head, he said that the customer was 401. The man threw him coins and rudely said, "Here." A 20-year-old student named Kibben thanked the customer and wished him luck. The guy saw the customer off with a smile on his face and said in his head that he worked part-time in a store and was quite happy with his life. As soon as the customer left, Kibben's face changed and he said with displeasure that the man was a bastard. He sat down, collected himself from the half coin and asked himself how he could be happy with such a life. The light was shining brightly from the windows of the store, and in the life of the main character, every day was the same. The scenario of what was happening was repeated over and over again. The guy silently looked out the window. The next second, he exhaled heavily. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in his pocket. Taking it out, Kibben saw a message from his mother, who asked what he was doing. The guy replied that he was working, and then asked why she suddenly wrote to him. His mother replied that she looked at the calendar and remembered that today was payday, and she already missed her son and the chicken. After reading this message, Kibben smiled and happily said to himself that he would get his salary today. After a short pause, he answered his mother that he would buy spicy chicken and batter today, to which she replied to him not to take it in batter, but in soy sauce with garlic. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard from the street, which made the protagonist very scared. Coming to his senses, he turned to the window in surprise. Without thinking twice, he jumped up. The guy opened the front doors, asking himself what it was, adding that it looked like an explosion. Suddenly, a black shadow eclipsed his face. Raising his head, fear appeared in Kibben's eyes. Huge and scary monsters towered over the houses. The protagonist looked at them in fear. The entire city, captured by monsters, was burning. Looking around, the guy asked himself if he was really sleeping, immediately answering himself that this was not so, because he clearly remembered that he was in his right mind. Suddenly, he heard a roar from the side and tensed up greatly. Turning around, he saw a huge monster looming over the house. Fear enveloped Kibben. The first thought that came to him was that he should run away from here as soon as possible. At that very second, he turned around abruptly. Then he ran as fast as he could. His mind was clouded. Without stopping, he ran, asking himself where these monsters suddenly appeared from. But suddenly he lost his balance. Kibben fell to the ground with a crash. Gritting his teeth, he cried out in pain and thought that he had made a mistake when he stumbled. Lying on the ground, he said to himself that he shouldn't have. When suddenly turning around, he saw his legs. "Why are they there?" the protagonist asked fearfully. Suddenly, blood spurted from his mouth. Then his head became heavy and fell to the ground. With the last of his strength, he turned around. Behind him, the guy saw a huge monster and wondered if it had really hit him with a tentacle. Thinking about it, he saw a sharp blade at the end of the tentacle. The protagonist cursed at last. After that, there was darkness. Then, the crackling sound of fire was heard. The protagonist slowly opened his eyes and saw a system screen that reported a notification. The entire city was burning, and the system notifications reported that the Human Awakening program had been activated, so the awakening trial was beginning. Saiban was lying in the same place where he had died just recently. Awakening, he asked himself. Suddenly, a bright glow appeared in the area of his severed body. The next second, his body was connected and the guy fell to the ground with a crash. Raising his head, he rubbed the back of his head and wondered what it was. Around him, he saw walls that consisted of numbers and letters running along them. Suddenly, he was very scared. Looking down, he saw that his body was safe and sound. Are his legs back together? He asked himself. Sitting on the floor, Saiban said nothing, not understanding what was happening at all. His mind was empty. His expression showed that he was lost. Standing up, he saw notifications in front of him, informing him that he had entered the awakening space. Looking around, the protagonist asked himself in surprise, what kind of voice was that? What is the awakening space? He asked himself. Saiban was there completely alone, saying that this place was like a hologram inside a computer. Suddenly, a voice was heard, informing him that the awakening trial was beginning. Hearing this, the guy was very scared. At that very second, a huge monster appeared behind him. After that, a notification appeared, informing him that the guy must destroy the monster, which would be destroyed automatically if his attack was successful. Seeing the monster, Saiban was horrified. Looking up, he screamed, asking what kind of nonsense this was. Did they really want him to successfully defeat this monster? The monster with glowing eyes looked at the protagonist and growled. Suddenly, it stretched out its paw towards the guy. The protagonist covered his face with his hands in horror and said to himself that he would die. Immediately after these words, the monster's hand hit the ground. The blow sent dust and smoke into the sky. A system voice was heard announcing that the awakening test had failed, so the player's body was undergoing regeneration. The next second, Cybin appeared without a single scratch. Looking at his hand, he did not understand anything. Was he really alive? The guy asked himself, looking to the side. There he saw a huge pool of blood in his hand. Horror appeared in his eyes from such a sight. Then his cheeks puffed out. Suddenly, he vomited. Regeneration, he asked himself, really? But before he could finish, he heard a roar behind him. When the protagonist turned around, he saw a giant monster in front of him. Tears immediately appeared in his eyes. Slowly opening his mouth, he tried to say something. He screamed loudly and ran. But in an instant, his head was torn off his body. His separated body parts fell to the floor. The boy looked at his body with tears in his eyes. The system voice sounded again, saying that the awakening test had failed, so the player's body was regenerating. The next second, Cybin reappeared without any injuries. The system voice said that the protagonist needed to destroy the monster. Hearing this, the boy was overcome with primal horror. He raised his head and screamed loudly, asking what he was suggesting to do, how he could kill such a huge monster. It was impossible to kill it, the system voice said. Hearing this, Cybin was shocked. The boy also read in bewilderment that the monster was programmed and was transcendental, so it was initially impossible to kill it. Cybin gritted his teeth and wondered if he had really been answered. He began to look around excitedly, asking what this place was and why he was here. In the system window, the protagonist read that this place was called the Space of Player Awakening and was created in the name of justice. The boy looked up in confusion. The system said that humans are a species of beings that can awaken, and the training will end after the player successfully passes the awakening test and can return to reality. It asked the boy not to be afraid of dying during the training, because no matter how many times he dies, the body will regenerate. Cybin angrily thought that the system really thinks that life is some kind of game, and this is increasingly similar to the scenario of some novel, but there is no choice but to believe in everything. Looking around, the boy saw traces of his dead bodies on the floor. Beads of sweat appeared on his face from fear. A huge, enraged monster suddenly appeared in front of him, while the boy thought that he had no choice in the first place. A bright magic ball appeared from the monster's mouth. It screamed menacingly, releasing a large stream of mana forward. Jumping back, the protagonist quickly slid along the ground. Kibben looked at the crater, thinking that now he could only die continuously, suffering from pain, or just accept everything. Lightning appeared from the guy's body. Enveloped in mana, the protagonist carefully rose to his feet. The system said that the awakening was successfully completed, and now skills and abilities are being generated, after which it opened the Kibben status window. Sparks of lightning began to emanate from the protagonist's fist. He knelt down, pushing off the ground. The awakening skill and physical strengthening were used. Kibben rushed forward, attacking the enemy because there was only one conclusion. His fist was thrust forward and the protagonist screamed loudly in rage. Flying forward, he had to accept everything and finish this trial. Gritting his teeth, Kibben hit the monster with all his might. The enemy's body was shattered into small pieces, while the system said that the awakening trial was complete. It congratulated the player on awakening. After listening to her, the protagonist smiled maliciously. He laughed with joy after reading that the quest was completed and the physical strengthening skill was obtained. Strong mana was magnetized to Kibben's body. Suddenly, his face changed. The guy began to look around sharply in bewilderment. The protagonist angrily screamed that the trial was over, so he needed to send him back. The system immediately began to repeat that an error had occurred. Kibben spread his arms to the sides, hearing that he could not leave the awakening trial. The guy opened his eyes wide, unable to say a word. A huge monster grew in front of him, when suddenly the guy read that the awakening trial was beginning. The protagonist took a step back in fear, wondering what kind of nonsense this was. The monster quickly hit the ground. Cybin wondered if he couldn't leave the trial. His body regenerated and appeared next to a bloody trail. The guy smiled nervously. Clenching his hands into fists, he screamed, "What kind of nonsense?" The monster hit him again, tearing his body apart. Cybin thought that this was some kind of bug in game terms. Because of this bug, his character was stuck in the trial forever. After some time, the protagonist sat on the ground, thinking that he was constantly dying but reviving, and so a week, a month, and then a year passed. With a crazy look, the guy thought that with each passing day he was losing more and more sanity because his body was regenerating, but his mind was not. The system said that Cybin's health points had been increased, so he needed to change the backup data. A status window opened in front of the protagonist, in which he looked at his characteristics. He screamed loudly, did his HP increase? The system explained that the HP was increased by repeated attacks. Kibben wondered if it was because of him that the backup data was changed. He raised his head up with hope and asked if the error was fixed then. The system suddenly said that the error was not fixed, so the protagonist would never be able to leave this place. A drop of sweat appeared on the guy's face. The monster abruptly slapped its paw on the ground. Time began to flow again. 2 years, 3, 4. Kibben tried his best to run and resisted the monster in the test. In this way, he began to greatly improve his abilities. The protagonist's body was torn apart again, and everything made no sense. Drops of blood spurted out of his mouth, and the memories of the first day constantly visited his thoughts, so the guy stopped resisting. The 10th year. Looking down, Kibben asked what was happening on the ground. The system replied that there had been no major changes, and the time difference between the world and this place was significant, as 10 years in the trial meant about 12 Earth days. The protagonist remained silent. He clenched his teeth in anger. The guy remembered his mother's messages on his payday. Looking down at his hands, Kibben said in frustration that he should have bought some chicken. The monster hit him again with all his might. 500 years had passed. Sitting on the floor, the guy thought that he had lost everything, namely his family and friends. He was tormented by only one question. Perplexed, Kibben repeated, asking why him. The monster standing next to him growled menacingly. He quickly began to lower his paw down. A small distance separated them, while the guy asked why. He raised his hand up, knocking the monster away from himself. The protagonist turned away. He clenched his teeth hard. Kibben's face changed and he screamed furiously in anger, thinking what kind of awakening? Justice, player, because he didn't need answers to these questions. The guy sat down a little and thought about why the error happened to him. He thought that he just wanted to enjoy life. The protagonist clenched his teeth and blood spurted out of his mouth. Standing with his back to the ground, he felt it quickly approaching, not knowing what to do with his anger. The monster approached him, when suddenly the guy furiously turned around, directing it to only one place. Kibben stretched out his hand, furiously rushing forward. Time passed, there was a bright sunset outside. 10 years had already passed since the beginning of the awakening of people. A bright lightning strike appeared in the sky. The system began to repeat the error. A black hole was breaking through the sky. The system added that the server was damaged from the inside. The firewall in the system was destroyed, when suddenly Kibben burst out. Behind him lay a motionless monster in blood. Being in the sky, the guy's body was illuminated by bright lightning. The awakening test lasted 3,000 years. The status window showed the main character's characteristics, which were increased to the maximum. The system voice said that it was impossible to connect to the main menu due to a system error, so offline synchronization was launched. The main character, shrouded in a magical aura, looked into the distance. There were no emotions in his half-open eyes, and he said to himself that he had thought about this every single day for the past 3,000 years. The guy remembered the messages from his mother on the day of the disaster and finished what he would do first if he managed to return to reality. The system voice reported that the system synchronization was successful, adding that 10 years had passed on Earth. The main character was flying over the city. A system window appeared in front of him, after which he asked the system where his mother was. After a short pause, a red cross appeared, and the system replied that it was impossible to determine the location since the function is not available in offline mode. Hearing this, the guy exhaled heavily. Everything is always useless, he said discontentedly. The sun was slowly setting, coloring the sun, while Kibben said that they needed to go home. A few minutes later, he was standing at the ruins of his house. The guy looked at it in horror and asked what happened to the land and the house. Suddenly, 2 soldiers saw him. They immediately called out to him. Approaching him, one of them said that civilians cannot be here since this is a forbidden zone, so the guy needs to go to a safe area. Hearing this, the protagonist was surprised and asked himself if these soldiers really said that his area was in a forbidden zone. After these thoughts, he turned around and asked what happened here. Then, without moving from his place, he asked why this whole place was in ruins. The soldiers looked at each other. After a short pause, one of them closed his eyes and asked where he had been all this time, because this is all because of the rift that appeared 10 years ago. Hearing this, Kibben had an idea. Looking away, he asked himself in fear if that soldier was really talking about those monsters. After thinking for a moment, he pointed to the house and asked if they knew what happened to the people who lived there. Everyone died, the soldier answered firmly. As soon as the protagonist heard this, horror and fear appeared in his eyes. His jaw trembled. Everything around him changed color, while the boy wondered if his mother had died. But the soldier suddenly spoke. He put his hand to his chin and said that the people who managed to get out were safe, adding that he heard that the state evacuated them to a safe zone. Kibben silently listened to the soldier who continued to talk. If he was looking for someone, he should have heard. Suddenly, the protagonist grabbed the soldier. He asked where they were with eyes full of madness. The soldier was very scared from this. Taking the boy's hands, he answered that it was in the bad city of Zone B. Hearing this, the protagonist let go of the soldier. Then he started to run. The soldier exhaled heavily. Suddenly, the radio began to vibrate. A voice was heard. which reported that a rift had been discovered. The supposed location was the refugee village in Lunar City. The soldiers were shocked to hear this. Area B, the refugee village. Lightning appeared in the sky. At this time, a military vehicle was driving towards them. Upon arriving, the door of the vehicle opened. An old man with a scar on his eye got out. He was from the city defense force. Turning to the soldiers, he ordered them to cordon off the area and call for reinforcements because they would not be able to destroy all the monsters. Then he turned to his subordinate and shouted, asking where the reinforcements were, why they were so late. The soldier saluted and said that they were heading towards them. Hearing this, the old man could not help but slam his fist on the vehicle. He frowned and shouted furiously that these bastards were in no hurry because this was Lunar City, which meant they wanted to collect money from them again. While he was shouting, a girl approached him. It was First Lieutenant Juan. She asked what they should do with a worried face. The old man rarely turned around and shouted, ordering them to build a line of defense and deal with the small monsters, and they would deal with the rest when the reinforcements arrived. Hearing this, the lieutenant was very surprised. She waved her hand and asked if the general was serious, adding that then all the people would die. The old man looked at the girl and asked with displeasure if she was really suggesting that they go there without support and die with them. Then he ordered her to shut up with her opinion and build a line of defense, because if the monsters escaped to other zones, they would all die. Juan was horrified by these words. After a while, the soldiers were busy building walls. Suddenly, the protagonist's legs appeared not far behind them. He stopped and looked towards the soldiers. Seeing the cars, he asked himself what was going on, why were there so many soldiers here? Slightly lowering his head, he asked the system in his head what was going on here. The system suddenly reported that a rift was opening here, and that the full formation time was 3 minutes. Hearing this, the guy was surprised. He immediately remembered the monsters that appeared on the day of the disaster and asked himself if they would really appear here. He clenched his teeth in rage. Cyber realized that his mother was in danger. He stepped towards the soldiers. The soldiers immediately left him and said that there was a rift there. The soldier put his hand on Kibben's shoulder and asked him to go to a safe place. The protagonist pushed him away, quickly walking forward, which the soldier was very surprised by. The guy stood between the soldiers and pushed them to the sides. They looked at the guy in front of them in shock. The leader shouted loudly, asking what they were doing and how they allowed a civilian into the cordoned area, when suddenly Juan turned to the side in shock. The soldiers abruptly raised their guns up, pointing them at the guy. He calmly stood in the center. The protagonist covered his face with his hair. Menacingly, he ordered the soldiers to get lost. Beads of sweat appeared on their faces in fear. Kibben quickly walked forward. Juan screamed loudly, asking what was happening and why the guy was not stopped. The soldiers fell down in horror. One of them whispered, "Player," after which the girl turned to him. The guy added that this person was a player. Lightning suddenly appeared high in the sky. A strong rupture occurred, opening a portal. The soldiers raised their heads with wide open mouths. One of them asked in a trembling voice if the sky had cracked. Huge claws suddenly appeared from behind the rift. The soldier frowned in horror. His teeth began to chatter and his voice continued to tremble. Seeing the monsters, he screamed if this was a rift. All the soldiers froze in place while the guy screamed that this was suicide. Juan coldly looked ahead when suddenly she clenched her teeth in anger. She broke away from her place and quickly ran forward. The frightened soldier looked after her with bewilderment. The girl rushed forward without a single doubt. At this time, silence reigned on the other side of the city. Kibben slowly climbed the stairs. The system said that the route was generated. His rank was 5 stars. The guy gritted his teeth in anger. The monsters lay on the edge of the buildings, carefully watching him. Baring their teeth, they growled furiously. The monster abruptly pushed off from the building. It opened its mouth wide, approaching the protagonist. Without looking back, Kibben hit the enemy in the face. The monsters looked at the corpse lying on the stairs in bewilderment. One of them opened its mouth and stuck out its tongue. It stuck out its teeth and advanced on Kibben. The guy dodged the attack without flinching. Stretching his hand forward, he ordered not to interfere. Frowning, the protagonist grabbed the tongue with both hands. He quickly turned around and pulled it with all his might. The monster's body trembled with pain and gushed blood. Kibben came closer to him and pressed his tongue back. Trampling him, the monsters loomed over the protagonist. One of them changed his expression, frowning menacingly. The guy jumped up and hit him in the chin with all his might. He clenched his teeth, turning over in the air. Kibben looked up, examining all the opponents. The protagonist began to swing his legs in different directions. The guy clenched his fists, attacking the monsters. He spun in the air, forming lightning strikes. His body was surrounded by torn parts of the monsters. The enraged dragons quickly flew down with their mouths open. Kibben spun menacingly in the sky. He straightened his leg and hit one of the opponents in the face. The guy continued to attack, breaking their bodies into small pieces. The frightened monsters retreated back. Kibben watched as the parts of the monsters quickly flew down. The guy pushed off, quickly accelerating and flying forward. June quickly ran forward. She wondered where he was because he was just coming here. After climbing the stairs, the girl suddenly stopped. She raised her head up, saying in a trembling voice, "Impossible." The girl looked at Kibben's back, asking if he really destroyed the 5-star rift alone. Suddenly, an explosion was heard from the side. A huge monster stood above the houses, roaring loudly. Shock suddenly appeared in his eyes. He saw his dead relatives. His eyes were covered with rage. He leaned towards the protagonist, screaming furiously. At this time, the system informed Kibben that the leader had been found. The guy heard this and looked at the monster. The system again said that the rift would be closed after it was destroyed. The protagonist's eyes were full of hatred and anger. He turned to face the enemy. Without a drop of fear or doubt, the guy walked towards the monster. The monster looked at him, showing a terrifying aura. But the protagonist did not stop and showed his aura in response. From his expression, it was clear that he would never lose. At this time, under the influence of a powerful aura, the soldier fell to his knees. June was shaking with fear. She looked at the huge roaring monster and said that it was a class 5 leader. Suddenly, she turned around and saw people. They were all terrified, and the girl realized that they were survivors. While the monster was distracted, the lieutenant realized that it was now or never that she had to save them. After these thoughts, she stood up and shouted at the people to save themselves. The survivors stood there, not daring to move from the spot. Suddenly, a furious scream was heard. Hearing it, June turned around. Horror appeared in the people's eyes. They clenched their teeth, trying not to give in to fear. But the next second, they ran away screaming. They all ran past the protagonist. Among them were even small children. The girl hurried with all her might, and there were tears in her eyes. Then suddenly she stumbled. The girl fell with a crash. Screaming in pain, she called for her mother. The woman immediately rushed to her daughter, but the monster was already behind. Jumping on them, it opened its mouth. Seeing this, the mother hugged her daughter tightly. Blood spurted everywhere. The girl closed her eyes and cried, but not feeling pain, she opened them. The monster was held tightly by the mouth. The protagonist saved the mother and daughter. Thanking him, they ran. Kibben looked at them out of the corner of his eye. There was sadness and sorrow in his eyes. Without taking his eyes off, he ordered the system to find his mother. Then he raised his head, listening to the system say that scanning the area from the player's memory had begun. Standing in place, the protagonist listened to the system count down to the end. "Scanning is over," it said, and at that very second, the guy saw the light. Standing in the square completely alone, he heard the system say that the scanning object was not found. At first, there was hope on the boy's face, but after hearing this, he sank. Kibben remembered his parents and sister. Leaving his memories, he looked down in disappointment. 3,000 years, he said to himself. He remembered them again and again, unable to forget all that hell. But now his memories are blurry. Thinking about this, the boy closed his eyes. The leader monster roared furiously. The next second, it swung, screaming even louder. Unable to bear it, June covered her ears, asking what it was. Suddenly, what she saw shocked her. The monster opened its mouth wide. Magic projectiles began to appear in it. The next second, they flew towards the protagonist. The monster's attacks quickly flew towards the boy's back. He gritted his teeth and decided to activate the skill. Kibben wrapped himself in mana and activated his physical reinforcement, when suddenly the system said that the activation was successful and the awakening mode was on. The guy's eyes glowed with mana. Swinging his arm, he threw an attack forward. Covering his face with his hair, he looked down. Kibben remembered his mother's messages about how she missed her son and the chicken. The protagonist pushed off the ground with all his strength. In his mind were memories of a happy payday. He gritted his teeth from the pain in his heart. Messages with his mother continued to pop up in front of his eyes. Wrapped in lightning, the guy rushed towards the attacks. He quickly swung his fist, defending himself from the blows. June's mouth opened in shock, thinking that it was incredible because the guy redirected the monster's attacks outside the monster. Kibben landed on the ground, bracing himself with his hand. The girl watched him carefully. She excitedly thought that he did not miss any of them. With glowing eyes, the monster quickly looked forward. He immediately opened his mouth wide. A magic ball began to activate in his mouth. He let out a menacing cry and released a huge stream of mana forward. Simon stood straight, waiting for the attack coming towards him. Streams of lightning began to form in his palm. The guy quickly put his hand behind his back. Gritting his teeth, he menacingly pointed his fist forward. A tear from the guy's eye fell to the ground. Covering his face with his hands, he quickly rushed forward. A large whirlwind of mana flew towards the protagonist. The monster's face changed, greatly surprised. He opened his mouth wide, screaming loudly. His body was thrown back sharply. It dissolved into thin air, leaving no trace. The survivors and soldiers looked up in excitement. The protagonist stood in front of the crater, looking at the bright sun in the sky. Jiwon, with her mouth wide open, fell to her knees. With beads of sweat on her face, she could not utter a word. Saibin turned back, turning off the skill. After a couple of seconds, he returned to his previous state. The boy stood above the crater, looking down. He pursed his lips in pain. The protagonist closed his eyes, thinking that he was tired. Careful footsteps were heard on the stairs. Jiwon turned around in surprise, sensing someone's presence. The woman's hands and body were shaking violently. She looked at Kibben's back and called out to him. The protagonist stopped, turning around abruptly. He froze in shock, opening his eyes. They were standing a few meters away from each other. The system said that it had started scanning the voice, and it matched the data from the player's memory. The boy was speechless. He thought that the last 3,000 years had flashed before his eyes. The protagonist thought that all his emotions hidden deep inside had suddenly burst out. He pursed his lips and tears began to flow from his eyes. The tears quickly began to fall down. With pain in his heart, the boy said, "Mom." The woman covered her face with her hands, looking forward. Both suddenly took steps towards each other. They broke away, accelerating forward. The papers about the missing son flew out of the woman's hands. The mother and son merged into a warm embrace. The mother was shedding tears, screaming that she had been looking for the guy for a very long time. The protagonist listened to her and could not hold back his tears. Kibben asked her for forgiveness for not being able to bring the chicken. Suddenly, the whistle of a spear was heard behind her. The woman suddenly rushed forward, opening her eyes. A huge spear flew into her back at great speed. Blood splashed on the protagonist's face, and he called out to his mother in fear. The protagonist became stronger, standing on a mountain of his corpses. But thick blood dripped onto the ground. This power, the spear pierced the body of the protagonist's mother. It passed through, touching Kibben. It was useless because he could not protect the most precious person. The spear was slowly pulled out of the woman's body. The next second, the protagonist's mother fell to her knees. Having fallen to her, the guy did not know what to do. The monster behind him was waving a tentacle with a blade. Suddenly, it attacked again. Screaming loudly, its tongue flew towards the protagonist. But Jiwon was already there. She opened fire on the monster with a pistol. She fired bullet after bullet. Smoke came out of the pierced flesh of the monster, and it let out a shrill squeak. The next second, it died. At this time, Kibben was holding his mother in his arms and asking her to wake up. The woman slowly reached out to her son's cheek. The guy looked at her with tears in his eyes. Smiling warmly, his mother finally told him not to cry because she loved him. After these words, there was silence. Kibben sank to the ground. Putting his mother down, he slowly got up. Tears were streaming down his face. Raising his head, he wanted to scream. The protagonist raised his head to the sky. The next second, he screamed with all his might. He did not see anyone around him. There were only him and his mother. Time had passed since that incident. Seoul Defense Force, 39th Battalion. Control Center. The commander-in-chief of the city defense forces was sitting inside, saying that he was imagining things or that they had gotten worse lately. Yes, Jian answered. The old man lit a cigarette and asked what he was doing, since everyone was talking about him lately. The lieutenant replied that he was moving through the most dangerous sectors and destroying all the monsters in the area. She kept her hands behind her back and continued to report that there was growing discontent in the guilds, so it was believed that they would soon begin to act. The commander-in-chief put his hand in his pocket. From there, he took out some papers and said that these were instructions for the girl. He then ordered her to bring the protagonist to him before he lost control. At this time, the forest was silent. Suddenly, a powerful explosion was heard. After that, several more were heard. Incredible magical power was in each explosion. The protagonist attacked furiously. He hit the huge monster in the stomach with all his might. Blood spurted out of the monster's mouth. Kibben's terrifying attack pierced the monster through and through, destroying it. Then the guy turned around abruptly. He immediately rushed to attack another monster. In an instant, the protagonist delivered a powerful uppercut. An explosion was heard, stronger than all the others. Smoke and dust covered everything. A minute later, the monster's blood was dripping onto the ground. Kibben held the monster's severed head in his hands. His kin, seeing the death of their comrade, screamed furiously. Then the guy released the monster's head. It splashed onto the ground. A huge army of monsters rushed to attack. At their head was a monster several times larger than the others. The guy took a weapon out of the monster's head. Raising his sword, he stood in a stance. Without moving, he ordered the system to activate the physical strengthening skill. The protagonist took on a form and looked forward menacingly, while the system said that the first level awakening had been activated. The guy carefully extended his hand forward. He released a huge stream of mana, after which the system reported that all the monsters were destroyed and the cleansing was successfully completed. It was pouring rain outside. Kibben was sitting alone on the edge of a cobblestone. Cold drops of rain were running down his face. An umbrella suddenly appeared above his head. The guy coldly looked up. He noticed a girl in front of him. June said with a smile on her face that she had been watching the protagonist and then introduced herself. She added that they had met before, but this was not the best time to get acquainted. Kibin remained silent, looking down. The girl pursed her lips, looking at him pitifully. She said that she understood his feelings because he was trying to destroy all the monsters and rifts. The girl said that it was pointless because as soon as time passed, the rifts would start appearing again. With understanding, she added that the guy was just trying to throw out his anger. June continued to hold the umbrella over him. Kibin asked if that was really why he had to stop. The boy interrupted the girl and said, 3,000 years. After a short silence, he added that his bones were broken and his flesh was torn apart every day, and he returned after an eternity in that nightmare. He stood up menacingly, saying that even when his body was cut into pieces and turned into dust, he continued to be reborn in that hell and also endured in order to find himself again in the place where he belongs, and that is next to his family. The boy came closer to Jian and said that all this effort was in vain. Kibin shouted, asking if she was telling him to put up with it. With tears in his eyes, the protagonist asked to relive it again. Putting his umbrella down, they continued to stand in the heavy rain. Kibin quickly walked past the girl. Without turning around, the boy walked further and further. Jian gritted her teeth, looking down. She turned back sharply and shouted that she would help the boy with his revenge. The girl confidently said that she would help him destroy the monsters and rifts. She sincerely asked the protagonist to go with her. 6 months later, the doors to the ward were closed. The pulse was normal. The woman was breathing with an oxygen mask. Kibin's mother was unconscious in the ward. The protagonist stood behind the glass, putting his hand to it. The guy looked down, upset. He whispered tenderly, "Mom." The guy sadly said that he became a civil servant. With a smile on his face, he added that he was a high-ranking one. Kibin said that he didn't think he would be able to come often. He explained that those who worked for the government were terribly busy, so he asked her not to be upset because he would be back soon. The woman continued to lie on the bed without moving. The guy said softly that it was time for him to go. Slowly, he released his hand from the glass. The protagonist turned around and walked forward importantly. He approached the sensor and put his finger on it. The door suddenly swung open and he walked inside. The employees stood in a row in front of him, putting their hands to their heads. The guys on the other side were standing in the same way. They cleared the way for the protagonist. Kibin immediately loosened the tie on his neck. He walked forward quickly. His leg began to be enveloped in mana. A black suit appeared on his body. The guy's hair suddenly began to turn white. The protagonist stood up straight, putting on a tight suit. He looked ahead and firmly said that they were moving out. Angry crows and owls were flying in the mountains. Kibin came closer, raising his head up. Once in the air, the leader of the birds appeared in front of him. The raven opened its mouth menacingly, looking forward. The protagonist spread his arms out to the sides, emitting a strong flow of mana. Enveloped in magic, the guy continued to float in the air. He looked menacingly forward from under his brows. A bar. The news was on TV, in which a man said that the government had officially announced that the work of the Shield Guild and the defense service of the capital region was finished. There was only one person in the bar. The man was drinking whiskey with ice. He quickly drank the drink in a few seconds. Then he put the glass on the table. Suddenly, he asked what he was doing here. A man in a suit sat down next to him. He smiled and replied that he was here to drink the same thing as the captain of the Scout Guild Chiel. The man in the hat lowered his head. After a short pause, he picked up his hat. Taking off his hat, he said, "Get to the point." While Chiel drank whiskey, his companion said that this is why he values him so much and then asked if he had heard of him. He continued to speak with a smile on his face. The source of the recent commotion, he was talking about it. Hearing this, Chiel stopped the glass of whiskey at his mouth. The man on the news reported that experts say that this is due to the recent destruction of the rift. Most likely, the state has found a way to destroy the rifts themselves. The man put his hands in his pockets and said that he is like a thorn and an obvious problem for their business. Chiel put the glass on the table. Looking down, he asked if he should eliminate him. Hearing this, the man leaned towards the captain and asked if he could not talk about such terrible things, adding that every time he talks about something, the conversation always ends in murder. Having said this, he handed the paper to the interlocutor. He looked at him out of the corner of his eye and said that they had orders, after which he ordered him to find him and recruit him, and also offer him to become a captain. Hearing this, Chiel turned to the man, but he closed his mouth and remained silent. After a short pause, he began to leave, saying that he understood everything, and the man looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really leaving. He had not even finished his drink. Opening the door, the captain said that he had already finished. When he left, the man looked after him. There was an unfinished glass of whiskey on the table. At this time, a 5th-class rift called the Monstrous Bird's Nest opened in the forest. Many monsters were flying through the air. A portal suddenly opened on the cliff. The main character appeared from there. The other players followed him. They stood on the edge of the cliff. There was no emotion in his eyes. The system suddenly informed him that he was in the rift zone. A breakthrough of the rift was inevitable. Kibben and his subordinates looked at the hordes of flying monsters. A comrade approached the protagonist from behind and informed him that this was the last rift to be destroyed this month. Kibben turned around and replied that he understood, then ordered everyone to stay on the high ground. After saying this, he jumped forward. The guy rushed towards the flying monsters. Upon seeing him, the monsters screamed furiously. Hovering in the air, Kibben asked the system where the boss was. The monsters immediately rushed to attack. The protagonist attacked in response. He dealt a powerful blow to the monster, smashing its head. Then he did a somersault. After that, he braced his feet on the defeated monster. Pushing off from it, he heard a system message informing him that the scan would be finished in 5 seconds. With 4 seconds left, he pierced the monster with his body. After that, he prepared to kick. With 3 seconds left, he smashed the head of another monster. With 2 seconds left, the other monsters furiously rushed to attack. In a second, they surrounded the protagonist. More than 24 monsters were a meter away from the guy. When suddenly the system reported that the area scan for the boss was complete, its location was 12.5 kilometers to the southeast. Hearing this, Kibben released a bright flash from himself, destroying all the monsters around him. His hair turned white. His body was enveloped in an immeasurably powerful aura. The system reported that the awakening mode was turned on. The guy's eyes were filled with hatred and anger. The next moment, he took off. Without a drop of fear or doubt, he aimed at the boss. During the flight, he left an energy trail behind him. After a few seconds, he stopped. The system told him that Kibben had reached the boss, so the navigation function was disabled. Hearing this, the guy raised his head. In front of him, he saw a huge monster. It was the boss monstrous albatross bird. The protagonist looked at him with hatred in his eyes. At this time, a guy was looking through binoculars. It was one of Kibben's comrades. Their comrade turned around and asked how things were going. Watching the protagonist's battle with the boss through binoculars, the player replied that they would be done soon because Saiban was devastating. Hearing this, the other players began to look at each other and say that their captain was the only monster. After receiving the report, the vice captain approached his comrades and said that they would be moving out soon, so everyone should restore the spiritual stones and leave no one behind. But suddenly, a bright glow appeared behind them. Turning around, the vice captain wondered why a rift was opening here. Suddenly, a knife flew out of it. Seeing it, the guy's eyes showed shock. At the very last moment, he managed to bow his head. But the dagger still left a small cut on his cheek. Suddenly, a man jumped out of the portal at him, raising his sword behind his back. The next second, he made a quick strike at the vice captain. The protagonist's comrade fell to the ground. Blood dripped from the invader's sword onto the ground. The vice captain was lying on the ground in a pool of his own blood. The person who killed him was a girl, and several more people came out of the portal behind her. Seeing them, Kibben's subordinates waved their hands and asked who they were. Suddenly, a man's voice was heard asking if the man was dead. Hearing this, the protagonist's comrades became scared. Another man in heels came out of the portal. The man approached the vice captain and thoughtfully said that he died from such an attack. It was Chiel. He closed his eyes and thought. Opening them, he said that he probably was not Kibben. Hearing this, the protagonist's subordinates became very tense. Chiel put his hands on his hips and said that he would ask the rest of them one single question, after which he asked which of them was Kibben. At this time, the protagonist, with glowing eyes, was eager to attack. The next second, he dealt a strong blow to the boss. A terrifying magical force pierced the monster. Blood spurted out of its mouth. Suddenly, the boss opened its mouth and began to gather terrifying energy in it. Seeing this, the guy tensed up greatly. After a few moments, the monster released a huge stream of flames. It hit Kibben, becoming even larger. Feeling a surge of such energy, Chiel was surprised. Slightly lowering his head, he said to himself that this was not an earthquake at all, since the sound was far away from here. Could it be, he thought. The man exhaled heavily. After that, he told the protagonist's comrades that it seemed that Kibben was not here. Closing his eyes, he calmly said that there was nothing to be done about it. He looked at the protagonist's comrades with hatred in his eyes and added that they would all die before Kibben showed up. Deep night, forest, he is here, he firmly said in his head. Looking around at the dark places, he said to himself that he was scared. After that, another voice asked why he was here now. Under the starry sky, the answer was heard that he did not know, because it could be because of the previous rift. What does the rift mean? The voice asked, to which the interlocutor replied that he did not know. No one knows, so they need to check whether this rift is safe for them or not. 2 black silhouettes were visible on the edge of the cliff, and one of them happily said that he found it. This was said by a guy with short white hair. The fire was blazing, absorbing the protagonist, when suddenly the system reported the assignment of a new ability. The protagonist's hand appeared from the fire. Saiban was absorbing the fire of a huge monster. His eyes were full of hatred. In his status window, the S-rank Resilience skill appeared. When the fire went out, the guy saw his opponent. The boss looked at him and growled furiously. The protagonist looked at the monster with contempt in his eyes. After a short pause, she said that it was time to end this. Having said this, he clenched his hand into a fist. Then the guy stood up. The next second, he furiously rushed into the attack. His blow created a powerful magical wave that pierced the heavens. Blood spurted from the boss's mouth. With his attack, the protagonist tore the monster into two parts. Both of its parts fell to the ground with a roar. Then the system reported that the boss was destroyed, the rift was cleared. A red moon shone in the sky. A few seconds later, it changed its color to normal. After the death of the boss, something fell out of it. It was a small black ball. The protagonist picked it up and asked himself if it really came from the monster's body, but he had never seen anything like it before. Looking at the ball, he asked the system what it was. The system performed a scan and reported that it was complete. After a short pause, it reported that it was a daystone. Without taking his attention off the stone, Kibben asked what he could use it for. The system replied that it was unable to provide more information due to the autonomous mode. Hearing this, the guy looked away and asked discontentedly if she knew anything else. Unexpectedly, the system informed him of the danger several times. Hearing this, the protagonist was surprised. The system reported that a battle had begun at the entrance to the rift. Hearing this, the guy was shocked. At this time, on the cliff, Cheel rushed to attack. He hit the protagonist's comrade in the face perfectly. From such a blow, the guy flew back. His comrade rushed to attack with his sword at the ready. But before he could do anything, Cheel dealt him several precise blows. Blood spurted from the guy's nose. At that very second, the captain knocked the enemy down. Then he suddenly tore off his feet. He jumped on the guy who had not yet lost his balance. In midair, Cheel grabbed his head and hit him in the face with his knee with all his might. After such a blow, the guy flew back. Cheel, however, landed neatly on the ground. He alone defeated all of the protagonist's comrades. No one, he said discontentedly. The captain turned around and added, none of them are Kibben. Suddenly, they saw how the sun changed. A subordinate came to Cheel and reported that someone killed the boss and cleared the rift. Looking at the sky, Cheel said in his head that he then decided that the shaking happened because of Kibben's battle. After these thoughts, he began to leave, telling the others that they needed to find a way to get off this cliff. But before they could leave, a powerful surge of energy was heard behind them. Cheel immediately turned around. Their view was blocked by raised dust. The protagonist's comrades raised their heads with the last of their strength. When the dust cleared, boots from Kibben's team appeared. Then a familiar figure appeared. The guy watched it with one eye. And finally, the protagonist's head appeared. Seeing this, the boy was very happy. "Captain," he exclaimed, looking at the protagonist who had no emotion on his face. Kibben took a step. He walked towards Cheel. The captain kept his hand in his pocket and said mockingly, "Park finally came." Looking at him intently, he said that they were all looking for him, adding that he was the captain of the Shield Guild, the scout team. Suddenly, what he felt shocked him. The protagonist showed his terrifying aura that engulfed everything around him. Cheel felt Kibben's power and just stood there. The protagonist walked towards him. The captain did not move. There was shock in his eyes and cold sweat on his cheeks. His eyes suddenly sparkled. He saw a huge snake in front of him. The drool from its tongue dripped straight onto the shaking Cheel. Kibben was already standing in front of his opponent. Cheel looked up, shaking with fear. Suddenly, he came to his senses and looked forward. In front of him, he saw the main character. The captain bit his lip in horror. He wondered what this overwhelming aura was. Cheel couldn't even raise his hand. Suddenly, the main character turned to the captain with displeasure. Cheel shook even more. Kibben, without moving from his place, asked if he really said the Shield Guild. Hearing this, Cheel's comrades pointed at the guy and shouted furiously, asking who he was to talk like that. Was he really looking for death? But unexpectedly for everyone, Cheel turned around and shouted furiously, ordering everyone to shut up. The guys were confused, but obeyed. Gritting his teeth, the captain did not know what to do. He remembered how the man in the bar said that they needed to recruit the main character and offer to become the captain. Leaving the memories, Cheel said in his head that everything was bad. The captain did not tell about his power. He understood that they needed to make him their ally under any circumstances. With these thoughts, he stepped towards the protagonist and asked him to listen. Then he gently asked the boy if he had heard of the Shield Guild, and then added that they were the strongest guild in South Korea. After saying this, the man asked him to join them, adding that they could grant his every wish. The protagonist's comrades were lying beaten on the ground. There was no lie in the captain's words, since the salary of someone like him was determined to be at least 3 million won. This was the usual salary common among players. That was why so many players were eager to join the largest guild. In addition, they had such influence and power that no one could resist them. Hearing this, the protagonist's comrade thought that without him, their team would be lost. The protagonist silently looked at the captain. Accepting such an offer from the largest guild in the country could completely change one's life. Any player would give everything for these words. Chiel's subordinates waited for an answer. This was an offer that could not be refused. The protagonist remained silent. After a short pause, he said that he had one question. The captain slightly lowered his head and asked what it was. Kibben stared at the man and asked if the Shield Guild was responsible for protecting the city back then. He remembered the day he returned and his dead mother. Clenching his jaw in rage, he angrily asked if the Zeta Guild was responsible for protecting the migrant sector in the moon city of Zone B. Chiel smiled and replied that not only this area, but before he could finish speaking, he took a powerful blow to the face. The captain flew back to his comrades. From such a blow, he lost his teeth and consciousness. The guys immediately took out their weapons and shouted that the main character was just a brat who did not understand what he did. Then Kibben asked if they really did not understand. He explained with a dissatisfied face that this was payment for his people. His eyes filled with anger, after which he said that this did not compare to how he really felt. There was a red cross on the white shield. The Shield Guild is the strongest guild in South Korea. They protect the capital and surrounding regions from high-ranking rifts. They are the shield of South Korea. Giant monsters surrounded the tall buildings of the city. The creature's body was cut into small pieces. The monster opened its mouth wide, falling down. A hero stood in front of a group of people with a flag in his hand. The flag had a shield with a red cross on it. The guild has 5,000 people, including 3 S-rank players. The man's silhouette was dark against the bright light. The man opened his mouth wide, saying that he never imagined that on Earth he only brought elite guild members with him. The guy wiped his feet on them as if they were dirty rags. Moreover, the hero looks like nothing happened. The guy punched one of the people attacking him in the face. The hero kicked the man in the face. He swung his hand, delivering a punch. The people in brown cloaks were lifted into the air. 3 people were thrown to the side, flipping in the air. Several more people were thrown to the other side. Chaeol lifted his body, lying on the ground. A guy in a black suit was spinning one of the men in a circle, holding his legs. He let go of his hands, letting him go to the side. The man screamed. The people opened their eyes in surprise. Chaeol clenched his teeth. One of his front teeth was missing. The guy raised his eyebrows, looking to the side. There was a tall building in front. This was Bangbidong, the office of the Shield Guild. The car had flashing lights. The staff was hospitalizing the victim on the couch, shouting that they had 5 patients in critical condition. One of them had internal bleeding. The doctors asked to urgently prepare the operating room. The man stopped. He put a cigarette in his teeth, saying that this is why he asked the man to do everything peacefully. The doctor turned his head to greet the director. The man closed his eyes, saying that this evening was not very kind. He needed to talk to Captain Chaeol, so he asked to leave them alone. The man was lying on the bed. The doctor noticed that the captain was still unconscious. The director came closer, saying that he would think of something, so he asked them to leave the room. The man reached into his inside pocket, asking the captain to look at himself, all painted in blue and black. He picked up an unusual syringe in his hand, saying that he still needed to find out what happened there. The director injected it into Chaeol's chest. He pressed the button on top. The captain began to move his fingers. The man's body convulsed from the bed. Chaeol opened his eyes wide, rising from his seat. The man opened his mouth wide and breathed heavily. The director looked at him, saying that he looked terrible. He asked if the man was still the famous Captain Chaeol that he knew. The man looked at the director in surprise. He looked down, asking for his forgiveness. The director sat down on the next bed. The man closed his eyes and took the cigarette between his fingers, asking him to tell him what happened there. Chaeol frowned. He opened his mouth slightly, saying that the entire team was defeated by one person, Kai Bong. The director frowned. The man removed the cigarette from his mouth, asking if the guy was really that strong. The captain gritted his teeth, saying that he was. His strength was immeasurable. The director closed his eyes. He thought that it looked like the captain was admitting his defeat and apologizing to his opponent. The man opened his mouth slightly, saying he had one question. He pointed at the captain with his cigarette, asking how the boy would act against the guild masters. Chaeol looked at him, saying it was obvious. The man pursed his lips nervously. 2 male images appeared. Captain Chaeol couldn't give an exact answer. Kibben, the master of the Shield Guild, these 2 were beings beyond his understanding. A short man wouldn't see what was behind a wall if he stood in front of it. Chaeol was in a different category. The captain clenched his hand into a fist, saying he couldn't answer that question. The director took the cigarette between his fingers. He leaned forward, asking if they could lure the protagonist to their side. The captain closed his eyes, saying the boy was hostile towards them. Chaeol looked forward, remembering the moment when Kibben beat up the guild members. The man got up from the bed, saying he understood everything. The director headed towards the exit, saying that the captain needed to get a good rest since he had woken him up using medicine, so he would feel unwell. Chaeol looked after him, saying that he understood. The man left the room, lighting a cigarette. He raised his lip nervously, saying that they needed to cooperate with the protagonist before the other guilds suggested it to him. The director held the phone in his hand. The man brought it to his ear, introducing himself and saying that they needed to send the assassin to the vice master. The protagonist frowned, holding the phone to his ear. The director walked down the hospital corridor, saying that if they couldn't get him, they should get rid of him, then the guy wouldn't stand in their way. The man smiled, holding a cigarette in his mouth. The shore was washed by blue waves. It was a fourth-rank rift, a bottomless beach. A giant crab raised its claws. A bright stream of light cut through its body. The protagonist clenched his hand into a fist. Kibben opened his mouth, addressing the system and saying that he had a question. The system said that he could ask anything. Air bubbles appeared in the water. A giant black monster rose from the depths of the water behind the guy. It opened its mouth wide. Kibben raised his fist to strike. He put it forward. A bright stream of light appeared behind his body. The giant creature fell apart into small pieces. The guy froze among the falling parts of the monster's body. Kibben froze, asking to tell him more about the Daystone. The system reported that the request was accepted. The Daystone is a black sphere that the hero picked up before. The guy remembered himself with an object in his hand, saying that he knew this. He was interested in whether the system knew anything else. The system reported that it was impossible to find more information in the offline module, so it cleared the Daystone. The protagonist waved his hand, asking it to forget about it. Kibben opened his eyes wide. He raised his head, asking if she really purified the Daystone. The hero reached into his pocket. The boy widened his eyes, looking at the bright sphere in his hand and asking why she did that. Cybin froze in place. The system reported that when absorbing the Daystone, two effects can appear. The first, increasing the level of the system, and the second, access to the source of the rifts. The hero tightly clutched the sphere in his hand. Cybin widened his eyes, looking at the object in his hand. The protagonist frowned, thinking about the source of the rifts. He allowed the system to absorb the stone. Blue waves washed over the sand. The system reported that the absorption of the Daystone began. There was a blue sky above the buildings. People were walking down the street. They opened their mouths in surprise, looking away. Passers-by widened their eyes. Among the crowd, a guy in a blue robe was walking. The hero looked at the piece of paper in his hand, saying that this was a bit problematic. Kangwee turned to the girl, holding out a sheet. He asked if she had ever met this man. The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the hero in surprise. Bright streams appeared around the sphere in the hero's hand. They grew larger, surrounding his body. Kibben frowned. On Kangwee's sheet there was a crookedly drawn man. The girl stepped aside, saying that she did not see him. She thought that the guy was crazy. The hero scratched the back of his head, saying that this drawing was strange. A bright stream of light fell on the body of the protagonist. There were bright highlights in his palm. The system reported that the process of absorbing the Daystone was complete. The system expanded. Kangwee smiled. He put his hand out, frozen in place. The hero stood among the people passing by. The guy lowered his head and grinned. Kangwee pulled his hat down. The hero raised his eyebrows and smiled, saying that he had found Kibben. The system reported that new features had been added: human analysis and expression of emotions. The protagonist raised his eyebrows in surprise. The guy looked up, asking how the human analysis skill differed from human search. The system reported that it allowed him to find out additional information, including height, weight, date of birth, and if the object was a player, then his profile could be additionally checked. Blue particles flew across the sky. Kibben thoughtfully rubbed his chin, saying that it was interesting, at least some benefit. He asked what the expression of emotions was. The system showed a satisfied smiley. The guy folded his arms across his chest. White clouds floated across the sky. The hero asked if that was all. The system answered, yes. The protagonist landed on the roof of the building. He lowered his head, telling the system to deactivate the skill. His hair began to darken. The guy's clothes changed to a business suit. The hero opened the door, asking the system to find the nearest bus stop from which he could leave. The guy was walking down the stairs. The system reported that a route of 1.5 kilometers from this location to the bus stop was laid out. The protagonist went outside, thinking about the length of the distance. The system asked if Kibben preferred to walk or fly. The guy's eyes widened. The protagonist frowned, thinking that the system asked him a question because of the new expansion. Kibben closed his eyes, remembering an adult man and saying that Lieutenant Colonel asked him not to fly. He said that the protagonist was creating chaos among the Air Force. The system showed a surprised smiley. There was a scarlet sunset above the city. The protagonist noticed that these emotions were strange. The system showed him a sad smiley. The guy asked to forget about it. The guy was walking along a busy street, thinking about something of his own. He frowned and looked back, wondering who this person was who was chasing him. Kangwee was standing among the crowd of people on the street. Kibben's eyes widened, thinking that it was someone from the Shield Guild, but he decided that something was wrong with the guy. The protagonist continued to move forward, thinking that he did not feel hostility from him. The guy looked to the side, thinking that this was a great opportunity to try out a new ability. He ordered the system to analyze the hero. The system started the analysis. Kangui was standing among a lively crowd of people. The hero was smiling. The system gave an error. The analysis failed. Kibben raised his eyebrows in surprise. There was a scarlet sunset in the sky. The guy said that this is a useless skill. The system showed a sad smiley. A bus stop was visible ahead. The hero sat down on a bench. The guy closed his eyes. The system reported that the pursuer was approaching. Kibben frowned, seeing the guy in front of him. He thought that the hero was finally here. He looked at the smiling Kangui, wondering who he was. The guy pressed his hat to his chest. The hero stood in front of the guy sitting on the bench. Kangui sat down next to him. Kibben looked at him, not understanding what was wrong with him. He had never seen him. The hero did not understand what the guy needed. Judging by this frank smile, he did not even hide the fact that he was stalking him. The protagonist raised his head, seeing the bus arriving. The system reported that the transport had arrived. The guy got up from his seat. He entered the bus, thinking that something was wrong here. The hero sat down on the seat and folded his arms across his chest. Kibben noticed that Kangui had disappeared from the bench. The hero did not understand where he had gone. The guy sat next to him, clutching his hat to his chest. The protagonist's mouth fell open. The bus moved forward on the road. Kibben, 3,020 years old, was shocked for the first time since he escaped from the awakening zone. A hissing sound was heard. The snake opened its red eye wide. The giant red snake wriggled, sticking out its tongue. It was a swamp snake. Its body was intertwined with another giant snake. A large sword was stuck into the ground. The cloak fluttered in the wind. The hero held the hilt of the weapon in his palm. There was a large scar on the guy's face. The giant swamp snake wriggled, approaching him. The hero pulled the tip of the sword out of the ground. Taram grabbed the sword with both hands and swung. The snake hissed, opening its mouth wide. The hero gritted his teeth, looking forward. The guy swung, cutting through the open mouth of the swamp snake, leaving a bright mark in space. A stream of energy moved forward, cutting the body of the giant red snake. Two snake heads appeared next to Taram, their mouths wide open. The hero swung his sword. The boy gritted his teeth and frowned. He swung, cutting through the body of the giant snake. Behind him, the huge snake opened its mouth, preparing to swallow the hero. The snake slammed its mouth shut, raising streams of dust into the air. Its eye was wide open. Something caught the snake's attention. It looked to the side. The body of the giant snake was cut from the inside. The boy came out of it. The hero took a few steps forward. Small pieces of the snake's body fell from the sky. Taram put the sword on his shoulder. The hero frowned, looking to the side. He tightly gripped the hilt of the sword. The boy threw the sword to the side. Streams of raised dust rose into the air. Taram leaned over, looking forward. The boy opened his mouth, telling him to come out. Streams of raised dust began to dissipate. The man was standing by the trunk of a tree. James Lee smiled and leaned on his sword, telling the vice master that it was close. Taram frowned, looking at him. The hero belongs to the Shield Guild, the Emperor of the Sword. The boy looked at the director, saying that he was a coward as always. The man laughed, saying that the hero was nasty as always. James Lee smiled, saying that the poison of large snakes corrodes equipment, even if he is a liar master. He must remember that their condition is not rubber. Taram put the sword behind his back, telling him to stop talking idle and tell him why he came. The hero arched his eyebrows, saying that he ordered him not to come to him unless it was urgent. The director picked up a cigarette, asking if he didn't get the message. Then he realized that the hero really lived in the dungeons. James Lee took a cigarette in his mouth, saying that he needed to eliminate someone. Taram's hair was fluttering in the wind. He turned his leg. The hero turned around, saying that he was not interested. The man should give this matter to the scout team. The director exhaled smoke. He smiled, saying that he had already done it, but they did not leave a scratch on the guy. He destroyed them. Taram's eyes widened. The scout team is a special force of the Shield Guild that only encounters players. They are talented fighters that the guild raises with special care. They are trained by the best masters of the guild. They are the priority of the guild and receive the best inventory. The scout team has never failed a mission until now. The girl stood in front of the two guys. The heroes were dressed in brown cloaks. There was a large sword against the dark background. Taram turned around, his eyes wide. He pursed his lips. The hero thrust the tip of the sword into the ground. The guy squeezed the hilt of the sword, standing in front of the man. Taram smiled widely, saying that the director had just interested him at first, but now he was all ears. Above the tall building, the sky was scarlet from the sunset. In the corridor, there was a long red carpet that went to a brown door. On the sign was the inscription, "The Prime Minister's Office." Blood was dripping from the tip of the sword. There were dark stains and debris on the floor. The guy smiled. Taram was sitting on a chair in front of the window, resting his sword on his shoulder. There were bodies of dead people on the floor. The The hero smiled, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Sangren stood in front of the two guys. The girl frowned. Sangren clenched her hands into fists, looking forward. She is the Prime Minister of South Korea and an S-rank player. The girl is a player with one of the best abilities. She decided to go the path of politics in order to save more players than she could if she continued the path of a warrior, a South Korean hero. The girl and two guys behind her were standing in a room full of corpses and broken tables. Taram smiled, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He asked how she was doing. Sangren frowned, saying that she didn't need his concern. She asked not to call her ma'am. The hero sat on a chair in front of her, saying that she was still as heartless as before. He asked if that was too rude, since it had been 3 years since he last saw her. The girl silently looked at the corpses of people on the floor. She opened her mouth, saying that it was true. It really had been 3 years. Sangren frowned, summoning a red sword and a magic seal on the floor. The girl's eyes widened, asking if he had forgotten her character in just 3 years. A bright stream of lightning shone in front of the guys. The heroes gritted their teeth, looking forward. There were pink streams of energy on the dark background. An S-rank player, the current Prime Minister, however. The girl has a unique feature. 10 years ago, she was one of the first to awaken. In other words, she is the first. The city was being destroyed by giant dragons and snakes. Sangren put her hands in front of her. The girl opened her mouth, ordering the skill to activate mass teleportation, the magic of the 7 stars. The magic seal occupied the entire room, shining brightly. A stream of light illuminated the entire floor of the building. The guy arched his eyebrows, covering his face with his hand. The girl and Taram disappeared from the room. Above the sea, the sky was scarlet from the sunset. It was the coastal cliff of Gangwon-do. A bright stream of light struck the ground. Sangren stood in front of the guy, holding a sword in her hand. The hero smiled, saying that she has not changed. The guy stood opposite, asking if she really thinks that by teleporting them here, no outsiders are involved. Sangren frowned, pointing her sword at him. The girl opened her mouth, addressing the Vice Master of the Shield Guild. She took a fighting stance, saying that he was under arrest on charges of treason. There was a scarlet sunset in the sky. The bus stopped. The driver announced that this was the stop, the headquarters of the Seoul Defense Forces. The protagonist walked forward. Kangwi followed him. The guy looked around in surprise. Kibin closed his eyes, listening to the hero's words of admiration. The military at the entrance greeted the protagonist, raising his hand to his head. One of them widened his eyes, looking at the guy behind the hero. The military opened his mouth, asking if this was his brother. Kibin put his hands in his pockets, saying that he did not know him. The guy stopped Kangwi. He arched his eyebrows, saying that he cannot go there because this is a military zone and civilians are not allowed inside. The protagonist sighed heavily, lowering his head. The boy walked forward, wondering who it was. Kibin took off his jacket, saying that anyway if he asked the system about the cause of the rifts it wouldn't answer. He wondered if he should collect more daystones and absorb them because it might make the system smarter than it is now. The protagonist froze in place, looking at the sphere in his hand. The system reported that information about the cause of the rifts might be available. The boy gripped the daystone tightly. Kibin pulled his tie down. The protagonist took off his shirt, looking down. He looked out the window, seeing Kangwi huddled under a bowler hat. The boy took off his pants, looking at the protagonist in the window. The military ran up to the building, saying that they needed to catch Kangwi. The boy jumped off the window and ran forward with a smile on his face. Kibin sighed heavily, closing his eyes, saying that it was driving him crazy. There was a scarlet sunset in the sky. The military shouted after the boy, telling him to stop. A gust of strong wind swept over the green grass. Taram gritted his teeth, thrusting his sword forward. Sangren frowned, holding the weapon in front of her. The boy approached her, the swing of their swords leaving bright flashes in space. Their weapons crossed. Sangren bent her legs, trying to resist the onslaught of the giant sword. Taram opened his mouth, telling her to hand over Kibin to him. This was his demand as the Vice Master of the Shield Guild and the Emperor of the Sword. Sangren frowned. She pursed her lips, thinking that she now understood what the Shield Guild was doing. The girl held the sword with both hands, saying that thanks to the protagonist, who had recently dealt with all the rifts, the government did not renew the contract with the Shield Guild to defend the capital. The news anchors on the TV screen reported that the government had officially announced that the people did not need the Shield Guild. The man was sitting at the bar. Sangren put away her sword, saying that because their guild didn't receive money from the government, they were having difficulties, so they tried to recruit Kibin by offering him money and status. Taram's eyes widened. Sangren swung her sword, sending the boy flying back with a bright stream of energy. The girl recalled how Captain Chaeol frowned, saying that none of them were Kibin. She was saying that until now, everyone had turned a blind eye to the crimes of the Shield Guild. The people were thrown aside. 3 people were thrown back. The girl noticed that neither money nor status affected Saiban, and he destroyed their team, flipping in the air. The hero opened his eyes wide, flying upward. On the black background were blue streams of energy. Sangren said that this is why the only thing the Shield Guild can do now is kill Saiban. The boy presented a white shield with a red cross, saying that it would be a waste to kill a hero like Saiban, but they have no choice if they want the government to renew their contract with them to protect the capital. Sangren frowned, saying that he made a terrible mistake when he decided to attack her. She asked if he thought that his threats would make her hand over Saiban. The girl remembered looking at the corpses on the floor, saying that the boy also dared to attack her people. Taram opened his eyes wide, looking at the bright stream of energy. Sangren raised her hand and smiled, saying that the guy needs to be beaten up well. The girl snapped her fingers. Bright streams of energy rushed towards Taram's body. There was a scarlet sunset above the building. Kanghui was sitting tied up on the floor. The protagonist came out of the office, looking at him. The sign said, "Team Captain, Kibben." The guy asked if they really caught him. The heroes noticed that the young man was standing at his door. He did not resist, so they just tied him up. Kanghui smiled, looking at the protagonist. Kibben arched his eyebrows, saying that they needed to talk. He asked why the guy was following him. The hero opened his eyes wide, looking at him. Kanghui smiled, saying that he just wanted to meet the protagonist. The people opened their mouths in surprise, looking at him. The girl clenched her hands into fists, touching the guy. Kibben leaned closer, asking who he was and how he knew him. The guy laughed. Kanghui smiled widely, saying that of course he knew, since he came from there. The silhouettes of the heroes froze in front of each other. The protagonist frowned, asking what did he mean by from there. The boy sat on the floor, saying that he was curious to know what came to their world, and in order to understand it, he would follow the hero. It was logical. Kanghui smiled slyly. The hero widened his eyes. Kibben sat on the floor with bright numbers, realizing that the boy knew about him. Kanghui looked at the protagonist, saying that he would be in his care. The boy smiled widely, asking him to take care of him. Ji-woon brought a knife to his throat. He frowned, telling the reckless boy to watch his language. The hero froze, saying that this was the army and not a place where he could just come. Kanghui widened his eyes, asking to be accepted into their ranks, then he too would be a soldier. Ji-woon widened his eyes, looking at him. The hero laughed. The boy looked at him in surprise. Ji-woon moved his lips, saying that he agreed. The heroes widened their eyes in surprise, looking at them. The boy put away his knife, saying that there is a rule if he wants to join their team. Ji-woon gritted his teeth and widened his eyes, saying that the boy must fight him. If he can win, then they will accept him as one of them. Kanghui widened his eyes and raised his eyebrows. The protagonist turned to the vice captain. Ji-woon turned to him, asking him not to stop him. The hero gritted his teeth, saying that he can't ignore this, even at his request. The boy looked away, saying that if he needs to defeat the hero in order to join the team, then everyone here is stronger than him. The girl and the boy laughed nervously, standing to the side. Ji-woon looked at them with displeasure. They looked away. The hero punched his palm, saying that it was true, he was the weakest here. Bright streams of energy shone above the ground. They reached for Taram's body. The hero gritted his teeth and thrust his sword forward. Taram swung, cutting through the streams of bright energy. Sangren frowned, looking at him. The boy smiled maliciously. He pressed his hand to his shoulder and lowered his head, asking if this meant that she would not give up Kibben. The hero thrust his hand in front of him with the precious stone. The girl's eyes widened, wondering if this was the stone of return. She rushed towards him, telling him to stop. Taram smiled, asking her to think about it. After all, one of the titles she defended was the strongest in Korea. The boy clenched his hand, breaking the stone. Sangren swung her sword, preparing to attack from above. The hero smiled, saying that he would be happy to see if she could protect those dear to her. Taram widened his eyes, looking at her. A bright stream of energy rushed into the sky. The girl stopped. Sangren raised her head. On the ground in front of her was a magic seal. Sangren gritted her teeth in displeasure and thought that her enemy was truly strong and that his resilience skill had undoubtedly reached rank S, remembering how Taram tried to hit her with a sword. The girl realized that he had a mythical class weapon, Dragon Tooth. Frowning in irritation, the woman realized that this was the most terrible opponent for Kibben. The setting sun painted the sky orange. The man cracked his knuckles, offering to begin. With his reddened eyes widening, he called himself the weakest member of the party. Rushing forward, the player wished death on the enemy. The fighter swung his fist. Kanghui raised his leg high, kicking his hand. The man's eyes widened in shock. The boy smiled innocently and asked if he had to defeat him to stay. The boy clenched his fist. He pointed it straight at his opponent's face. Looking up in fear, the player felt the difference in their strength. The fist rushed forward. The fighter noticed it in front of him. Someone raised a single finger. The protagonist was able to stop the duelist's fist with it. Kanghui raised his eyebrows in surprise, noticing this. Kibben looked at him attentively. The boy smiled and felt his body break out in cold sweat. The boy lowered his hand. Standing in front of the newcomer, the young man reminded them that he had never introduced himself. Closing his eyes, the player said his name. The guest smiled widely. Resolutely looking forward, the awakened one said his name. Raising his hand, the man wanted to say something, but the main one interrupted him and said that they were not rivals. Narrowing his eyes, Kibben explained that being aware of an opponent's abilities was a skill. The fighter frowned in frustration. He looked down in confusion. Frowning, the warrior said that he understood everything. The man clenched his fist. The boy turned around to look at him. The young man frowned sternly and said nothing. Kangwei looked at him and repeated his previous words about the enemy's abilities. Smiling happily, the boy asked if this phrase was addressed to him. Narrowing his eyes suspiciously, the player offered to fight him, noticing his interesting abilities. People watched their conversation from the sidelines. The awakened one replied that he had no choice and said that he had thought about it a lot. The main character asked what they were talking about. Frowning in disbelief, the guys realized that whoever decided to fight their leader would come to an end. The people in cloaks stood next to each other. The captain's team was a rift cleanup group. They had been next to their leader for half a year. Menacingly frowning, the man mentally called the newcomer stupid. Remembering how Kangwei kicked his hand, the fighter thought that their captain's strength was on a whole other level. Getting into a fighting stance, the boy suggested starting the fight. Putting his hands in his pockets, Kibben asked him to attack. The awakened one jumped up and ran forward. The boy easily dodged his blow. The guest gritted his teeth and swung his fist. The opponent's leg appeared in front of his face. The young man hit his opponent hard on the head. Frowning, he said that it was an imitation of his own blow in revenge for his subordinate. The people's mouths opened in shock. The man's eyes widened in amazement, thinking that nothing less should have been expected from the captain. Seeing that the opponent was still standing, the player was surprised. Kangwei was able to block the blow by putting his hands in front of him. Shaking his hand, the protagonist asked if he was okay, because the blow was quite strong. Kibben tried to hit him with his fist, but the boy dodged. The boy furiously knitted his brows and asked who he really was and who sent him. The awakened one smiled, continuing to block his blows. The guest slammed his foot into the ground, kicked his opponent in the shoulder. Kangwei replied that it was a secret. The powerful blow threw the player into the air. The protagonist's eyes widened in shock. Looking to the side, he realized that this was the first time he had been sent flying. Swinging his burning hand, the boy declared that it was too early to be surprised. A wave of light energy flew out of his hand. It approached the frightened Kibben. He managed to hit the projectile in time and change its trajectory. The boy looked ahead tensely. Frowning, he assumed that it was magic, but immediately rejected this idea. The young man landed on his feet. Finding himself in front of his opponent, the player asked what kind of energy it was. The awakened one smiled. A light aura appeared around his body. The fireball shot forward and headed towards the opponent. A powerful explosion was heard on the battlefield. Kangwei spread his burning arms. He began to throw energy projectiles forward one after another. The other people watched in shock. The man's eyes widened in shock, thinking that this man was really strong. The exhausted boy smiled and lowered his hand. Seeing a cloud of smoke in front of him, he asked if this was really a victory. Suddenly, a silhouette of a man appeared in the smoke screen. The protagonist declared that he was still alive and could hear everything perfectly. His t-shirt was torn. The awakened one, with his mouth open, called him resilient. Kangwei said that his opponent looked whole, taking off the shreds of his t-shirt. Kibben was indignant that his clothes were finished. The boy grinned and asked if this was all his opponent could do. The young man tensed his fingers and declared that it was his turn. Raising his hand, the boy decided to capitulate and said that he had done all he could. He said that the leader of the group proved to be a worthy opponent. The people frowned in confusion, wondering if the newbie was running away. Pointing a finger at the man, the awakened one reminded him that he had defeated him in battle and asked if he could stay here. Kangwei happily raised his hand and said that he would be very happy if the captain agreed. The player opened his mouth wide and said that he was not finished yet. The boy asked what that meant. At that moment, a fist flew into his face. His body flew high into the air. It fell a few meters away from the main character. Kibben took a step forward. Putting his hands in his pockets, he asked the newbie to unpack his things. The people stood silently by the craters from the explosion. They looked shocked. The awakened one was lying on the ground unconscious. He had just been named the youngest member of the group. A bloody sky hung over the mountains, the Ancient Guild Rift, the lair of the 8th class fire dragon. A man in a formal suit was shown on TV. The 8th grade was the highest of all existing. Regarding the faults, a lot of theories are being built, but there is one thing that all experts agree on. Taram grinned maliciously. If the fire dragon opened its eyes, then South Korea would be in such a critical situation that it had not been in since the time of Tanga. Having plunged the sword into the dragon's head, the former leader of the Shield Guild laughed. The baby dragon opened its mouth, accepting death from his weapon. Because of this, the monster woke up, a huge wing hanging over the city. Numerous explosions were heard in the sky. The reptile destroyed buildings, raising dust around itself. The monster spread its wings, standing on one of the streets. A fire ignited in its fanged mouth. A real catastrophe awaited people. About 10 minutes before the fire dragon woke up, the baby opened its mouth and wheezed. The beast tried to crawl forward. The people from the cleanup team were standing around him. Lighting a cigar, the director said that it was more difficult than one might think and concluded that the hatchling was still just a fire dragon. Taram stood next to him. Looking at his colleague from under his brows, the Sword Emperor suggested not to waste time and asked how to lure Kibben here. The man smiled and said that it was very simple. He sat down next to the reptile. Frowning angrily, the director said that they only needed to kill the monster and awaken its parent. Sitting in front of the monster's face, the man said that when the fire dragon woke up, the government would send out a special forces unit to save some time. Hearing that this team would be the Rift cleanup team, the vice chief of the Shield Guild opened his mouth in surprise. With a stern frown, Taram asked what they should do next when the enraged lizard appeared, even if they managed to deal with the player. The director put his hand in his pocket and explained that this was the main part of their plan. Taking out a metal sphere, the man said that they would seal the enemy with this thing. The Sword Emperor's eyes widened in amazement as he realized that it was a daylight stone. The monster laid its head on the ground, breathing heavily. Saudi Arabia had finished experimenting with the stone. The Vice Guild leader's pupils narrowed as the director said that this sphere could be used to put the fire dragon to sleep. Taram pierced the baby's neck with his sword. The reptile stuck out its tongue and trembled. The monster fell to the ground, unconscious. The Sword Emperor grinned and laughed. Without removing his sword from the monster, the Vice Guild leader burst out laughing. Raising his hand, he said that he liked it. The man shouted that he would wait for his enemy here. A huge fire dragon towered over the city. Children were playing on the playground under the supervision of their parents. A small boy stared at the sky. The teacher approached him and asked what had happened. The child asked her to look up. The girl looked up in surprise. The sky above the city had turned blood red. The tank treads began to move. Armored vehicles were driving along the road. A helicopter was flying over the buildings. The news started on TV. The presenter said that the sky had turned red and that this was not an exercise. Passers-by stared at the outdoor screen. They looked scared. The journalist said that all citizens should immediately evacuate to the nearest underground bunkers as instructed by the guide. Fighter jets soared into the sky. The news presenter repeated his words once more. Hearing that the government had declared martial law, the city's residents widened their eyes in horror. Confusion engulfed everyone. Monsters filled the streets of the city. Looking at the guest, the journalist said that the same thing had happened 10 years ago and introduced the viewers to a doctor of science from Seoul National University who studies faults. Karam spread his arms and declared that a real disaster had begun. There was a similar case in Russia. A radiation hazard sign appeared. People were watching the news through the window. The man explained that the Russians had given up on cleaning the rift and had barely managed to seal it by dropping nuclear bombs. This was only possible because this situation had occurred in Siberia, where no people lived. Hearing that such a scenario was impossible in Korea, the city's residents opened their mouths in fear. South Korea was plunged into chaos as if a helicopter was flying over the city 10 years ago. Sangren pursed her lips tensely. The Prime Minister frowned and was outraged by the actions of the Shield Guild. Looking at the employee, she ordered to immediately contact the National Intelligence Agency and find out where the Shield Guild was now. The girl frowned sternly and asked where the president was now. Frowning, the subordinate reported that he had been successfully evacuated to an underground bunker and that all powers had now been transferred to the Prime Minister. The woman put her hand to her temple, thinking that he had signed his own death warrant. The pilots were looking ahead. One of them, his mouth wide open, announced that they were approaching their target. The helicopter was approaching a huge dome, 3 kilometers away from the ancient rift. Sangren looked out the window. Her subordinates widened their eyes in surprise when the Prime Minister asked them to convey an urgent announcement to the commanders of each guild. Sitting in the recording studio, the news anchor asked if the government could do anything about the current situation. Karam assumed that the government staff would do it. Frowning menacingly, the girl ordered that all players whose level exceeded 100 be called. Bright lightning flashed across the dome. Someone stepped forward. The protagonist's cleansing team approached the dome. Looking sternly ahead, Kibben announced that they had arrived. His friend tensely pursed his lips. His whole body began to shake. His hands were shaking. Looking down, the man realized that this was not a good sign. Imagining the man being torn apart, the fighter assumed that their role was to pay with their lives. The boy with the mohawk, his eyes wide in fear, thought that they were sent on a suicide mission just to buy time. The heroes approached the dome closely. The government had gathered players with a rank above 100 so that they could hold out as long as possible, but passing through this place meant 100% death. With his mouth wide open, Kangwee was surprised at how huge this dome was. He jumped happily, realizing that this was the lair of a fire dragon. The other warriors watched his reaction in confusion. Their anxiety level was lowered. Looking at the jumping newbie, the hunter asked what they should do with him, because due to the urgency of the situation, he had not yet been added to the official lists. The guy replied that he could just follow them. Remembering their fight, the young man thought that maybe he could be of some use. Approaching the red dome, the player gave the order to enter. The people passed through the portal. The dome was covered with a white grate. The rift seemed to spit the uninvited guests back out. The man landed on his feet, while his comrades fell to the ground. Shocked, his eyes widened, the fighter wondered what was going on here. Looking at the shimmering edges of the dome, the warrior realized that they had just been thrown out of the rift. The protagonist turned around. There was no one behind him. All his comrades remained outside. Looking down, Kibben realized that this was the first time something like this had happened, and wondered if the Class 8 rift had always been like this. Pursing his lips, the boy decided that something was definitely wrong here, and that even he would have a hard time clearing this place. Suddenly, Kanghui approached him. The boy asked how he managed to do this. His eyes widening with glitter, the boy asked what they were talking about, and the captain decided not to continue the conversation. Someone ran forward at a rapid pace, leaving behind traces. The unknown person ran down the street. The members of the rift clearing team appeared in front of him. Noticing something strange, the player looked back. However, there was nothing behind him. Suddenly, Taram attacked him. A crazy smile shone on his face. The protagonist widened his eyes in shock and thought that this person was much faster than all those he had dealt with before. His hair turned white. His body was covered in a blue aura. The system reported that the awakening mode and physical strengthening skill were activated. Kibben extended his hand forward. He put it in front of the enemy's sword. The man cut his body with the sword. A deep cut appeared on the guy's chest. The system reported that physical defense was disabled. A helicopter flew across the red sky. The man stood on the roof of the building. Looking ahead, he said that a war had begun. Seeing military helicopters in front of him, Yuban wondered if the fire dragon had really awakened. Hearing the call, the man put his hand in his pocket. The phone screen showed the words emergency call. The player sighed, lowering the corners of his lips. The city was in ruins. Someone waved. The girl happily closed her eyes and greeted the viewers. Holding a selfie stick in front of her, Yui said that she decided to do a live broadcast outside the house. Pointing to the destroyed city, the woman said that the sky above Incheon had turned red. The streamer squinted and asked if someone was actually trying to awaken the fire dragon. Her phone screen lit up. A red emergency call alert appeared. Yui lowered her head and sighed heavily. The rank 44 man looked back as his phone vibrated. The man in the latex suit picked up the phone. The girl pouted when she saw the message. There was a bright flash. The message said that martial law had been ordered and that all players over level 100 were to gather. Red mountains towered over the city. Blood dripped onto the rocks. In a second, there was too much of it. The protagonist lowered his head. There was a cut on his chest. Saiban's eyes widened in shock, not understanding how he could have been injured in awakening mode. A pool of blood formed on the ground. The guy frowned menacingly, unable to believe that the physical defense had simply turned off. Placing his sword on his shoulder, Taram stated that he expected more and that this was too boring. The man expressed his disappointment with a frown. The young man looked at him with disdain. The Shield Emperor had a tattoo on his arm, indicating that he belonged to the Shield Guild. Pursing his lips, the player decided that this was not the best time for such a meeting, because the most important thing was to restrain the fire dragon. Turning away, the protagonist asked the enemy to leave because he did not have time to play with him. The Vice Guild leader cut the ground with his sword and ordered the enemy to forget about the fire dragon. Squinting furiously, he promised to kill him. Saiban raised his hand. Blood dripped onto the ground again. The guy took off his mask. He had to completely tear his suit. Swinging his fist, the young man invited his opponent to fight. He rushed forward. The player thrust his fist forward. Waves of blue energy swirled in the air from the blow. Taram's eyes widened in shock. A blast wave rolled across the city. Smoke filled the entire area. The awakened one knelt down and leaned his hand on the ground. Standing firmly on his feet, the man held his sword out in front of him. Somewhere on the top of the mountain, silhouettes of people were visible. The director smiled broadly, holding a cigar in his teeth. The old man took it with his fingers. Opening his mouth wide, he laughed loudly. The protagonist lowered his head in confusion. The Sword Emperor looked at him with disdain. The red dome emitted a strong glow. The members of the cleanup team looked at it in fear. A bright light illuminated the ruined city. Frowning, the man wondered if they were really going to stand there and do nothing. Someone took a step forward. Hearing the footsteps, the fighter turned around. Sengrin came out into the light, looking worried. She was standing in front of the Rift cleanup team. Approaching the vice captain, the prime minister asked where their leader was and why they did not enter the Rift. The warrior explained that they could not enter because of the fire dragon's protection. The girl approached the dome. The woman put her hand on the force barrier. She frowned silently. After a while, Sengrin said that it was not the fire dragon's fault. Looking at her, the man asked what this meant. Gritting her teeth, the Prime Minister realized that the Shield Guild had come here to kill her comrade. Hearing a strange noise, the girl looked back. A film crew had gathered outside. The reporter said that they were in front of the fire dragon's lair and that the current situation was critical. The woman frowned sternly and ordered her subordinates to get rid of these people. The boy, widening his eyes, said that they could not do this because this was no longer just a matter for Korea, and foreign TV channels were also broadcasting. There were many people in front of the dome. Gritting her teeth, Sengrin realized that things were bad. Blood sprayed into the air. Taram struck his opponent again. A grin was on his face. The man continued to advance, striking one after another. Smiling widely, the director said that it was all because of the dragon tooth. In the background of the magic circle, the most powerful weapon that was obtained in the raid on the 7th class rift appeared. The old man said that it was light as a feather and so sharp that it could even cut through metal, with the guild staff standing behind him. One of them raised an eyebrow and said that according to rumors, this was a powerful mythical class item. Standing on the cliff, the director confirmed this and added that this sword received the title of mythical item not only because of its sharpness and durability, because it also contained a large amount of magic and secrets. Many cuts appeared on the protagonist's body. Kibben looked up. The system reported that the dragon tooth reflected all the damage inflicted on the enemy. The guy realized that he had received a wound from himself. The Sword Emperor looked at him in surprise. Opening his mouth, the young man decided that a weapon that could disable physical defense was pretty good. The Vice Guild leader frowned. Squeezing the hilt of the sword, he was surprised that the enemy had the strength to talk such nonsense before dying. Swinging the weapon, Taram wished death on the enemy. Gritting his teeth, the man rushed forward. With a dash, the Sword Emperor found himself behind the enemy. Blood gushed from the player's chest. The Vice Guild leader sadly lowered his gaze. The protagonist raised his chin. Squinting, Kibben asked the enemy to give him this sword. Extending his hand, he asked to pass this weapon to his subordinates. The villain's eyes widened in horror. Lowering the sword, Taram asked how a man who had shed so much blood could say something like that. The guy scratched the back of his head. Looking ahead indifferently, the young man said that he had a lot of blood. Unlike the others, it turned out that he had 90% of his health left. The system reported that all the damage received was caused by reflected attacks. Frowning, the player thought that it was useless. The man gritted his teeth menacingly. Making a dash forward, he ordered the enemy to stop talking nonsense. Squinting, the protagonist said that his words sounded more like nonsense. Straightening his shoulders, Kibben swung his fist. An explosion of light energy occurred in the center of the city. The Emperor of the Sword was able to block the blow with his own weapon. Clouds of smoke swirled around the opponents. Blood gushed from the wounds on the guy's body. All the damage was reflected again. The young man barely smiled. The Vice Guild leader opened his mouth in fear. His hands holding the sword trembled. Taram looked tensely to the side. Seeing the huge crater from the explosion behind him, he couldn't believe that his enemy was capable of something like that. Blood poured out of the player's mouth. Raising his hand, the protagonist said that his own attacks were quite painful. Clenching his fist, Saiban laughed. Frowning menacingly, the guy asked how long the enemy would be able to reflect his blows. His health had hardly decreased. The fire dragon opened its mouth wide and roared. The reptile swung its tail. The monster destroyed several houses with it. Cracks appeared on the force barrier. At the same moment, they were restored. Baring its teeth, the monster growled in displeasure. A wave of fire washed over the dome. Spewing flames, the lizard tried to break through it. The director looked at the sky in amazement. His subordinates were scared. Lighting a cigar, the man asked them not to be indignant. Closing his eyes, the old man explained that it was almost impossible to overcome the 8th class rift from the inside, so breaking through it was also not an easy task. The fire dragon flew up above the fire. The Shield Guild still had time before the rift collapsed. The monster flashed its fiery eyes. Rearing up, the reptile roared loudly. Looking up, the director thought that this was the boss of the 8th class. Frowning, he realized that the barrier was weakening with each passing minute. Holding the daystone in his hands, the man decided to use it only as a last resort. Hearing the noise, the old man looked away. Another explosion was heard in the city. The director thought that first they needed to sort out this situation. Someone asked what they were talking about. Squinting, the man replied that he was talking about Kibben. Finding himself next to him, Kangui raised his hand to his forehead. The old man looked at him in surprise. His subordinates rushed after the boy, deciding to catch the imposter. A wave of red energy appeared in the air. The protagonist swung his fist. He hit the enemy's sword with all his might. His hand trembled. The system reported that the damage was reflected again. Blood flowed down the boy's chin. Grinning, Taram assumed that his enemy decided to make up for the lack of mental capacity with his strength. Drops of blood ended up on the ground. The man was confident in his strength because his powerful attacks could not go unnoticed, and the player received more and more damage due to reflection. The protagonist hit the sword with his fist again. This was a fight with a physical monster that was already considered the winner. This was the essence of a mythical class weapon. Confidently knitting his eyebrows, the Sword Emperor suggested that the enemy surrender because his chances of winning were simply negligible. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Kibben hit his sword with all his might. A new cut appeared on his stomach. The damage was reflected again. The Vice Guild leader smiled and called him crazy. The boy gritted his teeth. He struck the dragon tooth again. Blood splashed onto the floor. The boy stepped on it. The player swung his fist again. Strong gusts of wind appeared on the battlefield from the successive blows. Taram's eyes widened in horror. He had to step back. His pupils narrowed. The man did not understand how this was possible. Sangren's group stood in front of the dome. The Prime Minister's mouth opened in surprise. Approaching her, the fighter called out to her. Pursing her lips, the girl realized that these vibrations were not caused by the fire dragon. Gritting her teeth, the woman thought about her comrade. She put her hand on the dome and realized that the Shield Guild was to blame for everything. Standing behind her, the employee asked her to calm down. Closing his eyes, the boy explained that his boss was the leader of South Korea at the moment. Looking at the dome, he added that if the boss left this place, her raid on the fire dragon would be considered a failure even though they had gathered all the high-level players. In that case, South Korea would be finished. Sangren silently looked at the dome. She gritted her teeth and said that she understood everything. The red sky hung over the destroyed city. Smoke filled the surrounding area. In the middle of it stood the protagonist and his enemy. Taram lowered the corners of his lips and noticed that the enemy had finally stopped. Kibben lowered his hand. His lips were covered in blood. The boy looked up determinedly. The man smiled happily and called him a real monster. The ground around them was completely destroyed. The young man clenched his fist. Frowning confidently, he ordered the enemy to parry his attack. The player struck the dragon's tooth. The marks from the blows remained on the blade of the sword. Swinging his arms, the protagonist continued to attack again and again. The Sword Emperor gritted his teeth in horror. Another blow created a bright flash. While one attacked, the other did nothing but parry. This was an unusual battle. The attacker was bleeding. The Vice Guild leader's legs trembled. He fell to his knees. Blood gushed from his mouth. Taram could not understand how this was even possible. With his mouth open in confusion, the man could not believe that he was receiving damage because his sword was able to parry it. The Sword Emperor looked at his weapon. A crack appeared on the blade. The villain's eyes widened in shock. Sitting on one knee, the Vice Guild leader of the shield looked up. Flashing his crazy eyes, the protagonist urged him to continue parrying the blows. The villain's tense face was covered in sweat. Simon swung his fist again. With his mouth wide open, Taram asked him to stop. Gritting his teeth, the guy prepared to deliver the decisive blow. The powerful attack pushed the man into the ground. The blade of the dragon tooth began to crack even more. Blood gushed out from the mouth of its owner. The young man extended one hand and swung the other. His fist slammed into the blade of the sword. The weapon broke in half. The player's fist appeared in front of the enemy's face. Seeing him, the Sword Emperor opened his mouth in shock. The fist hit him right in the face. The tooth flew out of his mouth. The ground on the battlefield shook from such an incredible attack. The nose and jaw of the vice leader of the Shield Guild were clearly broken. The protagonist lowered his head. The broken sword fell to the ground. Kibben stood next to the defeated enemy. Kanghui continued to run away from the guild members. The boy held out his index finger and said that his friend had won. The people's mouths opened in shock, unable to believe it. They looked at the destroyed city. The boy raised the hilt of the sword. He looked closely at the remains of the dragon tooth and was upset that the weapon was broken. Standing on the cliff, the staff said that this could not be. Taram was lying on the ground with his arms outstretched. No one could believe his defeat. The director raised his eyebrows in shock. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheek. The Sword Emperor was in the top 3 strongest players in South Korea, and no one could even imagine that he could lose. There were dead people lying on the floor of the office. The only prerequisite for all the reckless actions of the Shield Guild is strength. But everything collapsed in an instant. The guild members stood on the cliff in front of the ruins. Only one person was to blame for everything. The protagonist lowered his eyes. Approaching the leader, the people in uniform asked what they should do with their plan now. The fire dragon spread its wings. Taram attacked Kibben. The Shield Guild wanted to kill him, having previously awakened the 8th level boss. The director held the Daystone in his hand, which could be used to seal the dragon. The boy was wearing a special uniform. According to the plan, he was to be declared a true hero who died in battle while trying to resist the monster, in which case he would be quickly forgotten. The white flag fluttered in the wind, having lost the youth who was the substitute for the capital's defense forces. Sangren and the state organizations would have no choice but to bury the truth about the death of their comrade. Then the entire nation would recognize the victory over the monster as an achievement of the Shield Guild. Frowning, the old man thought that this was their plan. The man narrowed his eyes in disdain. Standing on the edge of the cliff, the director ordered the use of a teleportation stone to leave here. Raising his eyebrows, His subordinate asked if they would not use the Daystone to prevent the fire dragon from leaving the barrier. The old man closed his eyes and explained that even though South Korea had gathered level 100 players, successfully raiding a class 8 boss would be no easy task, and most of the Shield Guild members were level 100 players, and without them, the raid would be impossible. The blonde man lowered his head and asked what they should do now. The man grinned and explained that they would appear at the climax to use the Daystone at the crucial moment. The guild staff widened their eyes in shock. Taking out the sphere, the director said that they would become the country's heroes who saved everyone from the fire dragon anyway, and then even the prime minister would not touch them if he knew the truth. The old man walked forward and called his subordinates to follow him. One of them widened his eyes and asked what would happen to the vice guild leader. Taram was lying unconscious on the ground. The man looked at him from the cliff. He narrowed his eyes in displeasure. Turning away, the director ordered to leave him there. The brunette reminded that this man was their master. Frowning angrily, the old man suggested that he go down himself and take the sword emperor, which was lying in front of that monster. The protagonist stood in the ruins. Kibin looked up and looked up. The man took the cigar in his hands. He threw it off the cliff. A magic circle appeared on the ground. A bright pillar of light flashed on the cliff. Looking at it, the guy sighed with relief. Running up to him, Kanwi asked if his comrade was not going to catch them. Closing his eyes, the young man asked his comrade to forget about them because they had a much more important matter. The fire dragon opened its mouth. A bright flame shone in its throat. The monster belched flame at the protective barrier. The people standing next to it noticed the energy fluctuations. Holding a special device in her hands, the girl reported that the barrier had been destroyed by 89% and that there were 5 minutes left until the rift was completely destroyed. Sangren looked at his subordinate with excitement. The man, opening his mouth wide, suggested that his colleague send the players inside the barrier since they only had 5 minutes left. The woman looked at the dome in fear. The force field began to disappear. The part of the city hidden behind it began to clear up. Soon, the dome completely disappeared from Incheon. The operator, his eyes wide in shock, asked if the barrier was really disappearing. The man opened his mouth in horror. A fire dragon was standing in front of a huge funnel. Looking at the device's screen, the girl shouted that the barrier had not yet been destroyed. Pressing buttons on the screen, she explained that only the part that prevented one from seeing the inside of the dome had disappeared. Sangren brought her hand to the force field. Frowning, the Prime Minister concluded that only the Shield Guild's barrier had disappeared. The woman looked down and thought that her friend was already dead. The reporters looked forward in surprise, seeing the person inside the barrier. The girl frowned in disappointment. Hearing the crowd's screams, she looked forward. There were silhouettes of people in the ruins. The protagonist was standing next to Kangwi. There were many abrasions on his body. The reporters adjusted the camera to record what was happening. The image of Taram, who was lying on the destroyed ground, appeared on the screen, and the people recognized him as the vice leader of the Shield Guild. Hearing this, Sangren smiled happily. A drop of sweat slid down her cheek. With a tense pursed lip, the Prime Minister wondered if her comrade was so strong that he could defeat the Sword Emperor. Looking back, she asked if there was a way to contact those inside, because they needed to get Kibin out of there right away. Looking up with a worried look, her subordinate reported that they had tried to contact several times already, but the rift waves were so strong that the signal was not getting through. The boy gritted his teeth as he heard the terrible roar. The fire dragon reared up and let out a battle cry. The reptile rained flames down on the walls of the barrier. The employee frowned and shouted that the barrier was 97% destroyed and that the rift would collapse any minute. The woman frowned furiously and realized that they had to stall for time and not let the monster break free. Looking at the players gathered near the dome, she thought that it was too early to announce a raid. People were sitting on the rocks waiting. There were about 30 people there, since it would be very difficult to gather everyone. Looking ahead, the employee reported that they had managed to establish contact. Sangren snatched the radio from his hands. The Prime Minister was looking closely at the device from which strange sounds were coming. She brought the radio to her mouth and asked who it was. Putting her finger to the earpiece, Kangwi introduced himself. The woman asked him to pass the phone to the player. The boy looked at his comrade and agreed. Closing his eyes, the protagonist asked what happened. Looking away, Sangren asked if he was okay. Kibin replied that he was still alive. The hunter approached him to eavesdrop on the conversation. The Prime Minister clenched her teeth tensely. She bit her lower lip, not knowing how to start the conversation. The guy looked down. Opening his bloody mouth, he asked what he needed to do. The girl lowered her head. Sweat appeared on her face. Squinting, the woman explained that they needed a little time. The boy, opening his mouth in surprise, realized that this was the announcement of a death sentence because he was essentially asked to die. Sangren held the radio to her ear. A humble agreement was heard from the speaker. The Prime Minister frowned, hearing a hiss. The radio fell to the ground. The girl stood silently next to the collapsing dome. Holding a microphone in front of her, the reporter announced that there was a man inside the fire dragon's lair. An image of the player and his friend appeared on the screen. Judging by their direction, they were heading straight for the boss of the 8th stage. Pointing at the dome, the man asked what the man was doing there alone and who would take responsibility for everything if something went wrong. The woman, with her eyes wide and crazy, ordered him to shut up. The employee's mouth fell open in amazement. The heroes walked through the ruined city. Sangren explained that the man was the hope that South Korea would see tomorrow. Frowning angrily, the Prime Minister said that she asked him to sacrifice himself for the future of the entire country. The radio was at her feet. The protagonist approached the fire dragon. His hair turned white, lightning flashed around him. Kibben looked forward with determination. He did not have much health left. Blood was dripping from his body. More blood appeared under his feet. The boy lowered his hands. The system reported that his vitality was below 8% and that he needed to rest. Lowering his head, the boy thought that he also wanted to rest. Blood stains remained on the stones. The system explained that as a result of blood loss, vitality continued to decrease. Stopping, the player realized that he could not rest. The system reminded him that he had the right to avoid the battle. The protagonist silently lowered his gaze. Pursing his lips, he thought that he could not run away because otherwise everything would turn into a sea of fire and then his mother would be in danger. Kibben looked up when the system suggested that he take his mother and go abroad. The sky was red. The boy called his companion useless. The system apologized. Smiling, Kangwi called out to his friend. The fire dragon opened its mouth wide. Seeing a giant lizard in front of him, the boy asked if they really needed to fight it. Standing in the middle of the street, the boy confirmed this. The hunter's eyes widened in surprise, admiring the size of the enemy and asking how they could defeat it. The monster rose into the air and belched flames. A powerful explosion was heard in the city. The force field shook. Looking at the screen of the device, the girl shouted that a high temperature was recorded inside the dome and that the boss's breath was probably to blame. Explosions were visible behind the barrier. The flames were so strong that the inside of the barrier could not be seen. Sangren clenched her teeth and thought about her comrade. Flames filled the streets of the city. Ashes rose high above the ground. The recruit managed to protect himself and his friend with a spell. Closing one eye, Kangwi said that he barely made it. The player raised his eyebrows in surprise. Looking at his friend, the protagonist said that his skills were truly impressive and concluded that energy had nothing to do with it. Smiling, the boy replied that there were certain similarities between energy and his abilities. Suddenly, something hit him in the face. The dragon's tail threw him back. The hunter fell to the ground. Blood was pouring from his nose. Looking away, Simon thought that he hadn't heard his words again. The fire dragon approached him. The boy realized that he would have to fight alone. Frowning, he called the lizard to attack. The monster bared its fangs and growled. The reptile extended its clawed paw forward. It hit the ground with force. The asphalt crumbled under its claws. The boy jumped on the monster's paw. The boss swung his paw, throwing him into the air. The fire dragon swung its tail. It managed to strike the destroyed part of the city. Dust filled the entire area. The player was able to stop the tail with his hand. The powerful blow pressed him into the ground, but he managed to stay on his feet. Blood gushed from the wounds on his chest. Blood was also flowing from the protagonist's mouth. The system warned that his vitality level had decreased by 7%. The monster opened its mouth wide and its eyes flashed with fire. The reptile struck the ground with its tail again. Kibben, brows furrowed in determination, blocked this blow as well. The tail did not touch the ground because the boy stopped it. Clenching his fist, he resisted the beast's power. The monster raised its tail. It stuck out its tongue to spit out flames. The boy dashed forward. The player swung his fist to counterattack. The boss turned its head and looked at him. The awakened one, skirting his paws, approached the enemy closely. A bright flash illuminated the fire dragon's face. The monster raised its paws when it was struck in the neck. Its body fell to the ground. The protagonist landed not far from it. The blood coagulated on his body. The system reported that his vitality had reached 4% and that the recoil from the attack was also lowering this indicator. Kibben opened his mouth and swallowed nervously. He bowed his head and clenched his teeth. Leaping high into the sky, the boy headed towards the enemy, leaving a bright trail of energy behind him. Flames shone in the mouth of the reptile. The monster released a stream of fire straight towards the enemy. The young man saw a wall of fire in front of him. Tensing his teeth, the player thought that this was quite dangerous. The awakened dodged the wave of fire. His judgment was correct. Flames shot into the sky. The breath of the 8th level boss could melt even steel. The protagonist spread his arms, trying to dodge the attack. Even resistance would not help him withstand it, because it was a fatal attack that simply had to be avoided. Kibben's eyes widened. Noticing something, he looked to the side. Turning around, the boy noticed where the fireball was heading. The fiery projectile approached the edge of the dome. The people on the other side opened their mouths in shock. The almost destroyed barrier was covered with a net. The breath of the fire dragon was impossible to avoid. Turning around, Sengren asked everyone to be careful. Someone ran forward, leaving traces behind them. Kangui jumped into the air right in front of the fireball. A cloud of purple energy appeared in his hands. It was able to disperse the enemy flames. Waves of fire flew in different directions. Smiling, the boy closed his eyes. The Prime Minister widened her eyes in amazement. Gritting her teeth, the girl wondered who had just helped them. The people saw someone summon a sphere of light energy that protected them from the fire. The protective barrier almost cracked under the pressure of the dragon's breath. A powerful explosion was heard in the air above the city. The hunter lost consciousness and fell down. His body collapsed somewhere in the ruins. Smoke rose above the destroyed houses. Suddenly, the recruit rose to his feet. Throwing up his hands, he shouted that he had succeeded. The monster shuddered in amazement. The protagonist grinned. Putting his hand to the earpiece, Kibben praised his comrade. Closing his eyes, Kangui was happy with the praise. Having risen into the sky above the city, Kibben decided that it was time to end everything. The reptile looked at him and bared its teeth. The guy frowned menacingly. Spreading its wings, the monster roared loudly. A fireball appeared in front of its mouth. Soon the flame turned into a giant sphere. The young man's fist was covered in a blue aura. His entire body began to emit a bright glow. The player swung his fist. A wave of blue energy went straight to the enemy. The awakened one spread his arms to rush forward. He managed to get close to the level 8 boss. Traces of cuts appeared in the air. The protagonist broke through the body of the fire dragon thanks to the force of his blow. Many flashes sparkled around the monster. There were more and more of them. As a result, the reptile fell on the city. The system reported that the suppression of the boss was successful. Kibben lowered his hand. Clearing the fire dragon's nest rift was carried out for the first time. Blue particles glowed around the guy. His characteristics increased and his skills improved. The dead monster lay on the ground. The young man became the first to kill the fire dragon. Looking to the side, the player sighed in relief. He had very little health left. The awakened one landed next to the boss's head. He lowered his hands. The system warned that his physical strength level had dropped to 3%. Notifications reported that the user needed treatment. Rolling his eyes, the protagonist said that he understood everything and asked the system to be silent. A joyful Kangui ran up to him. Closing his eyes, the boy asked if the captain saw how he managed to reflect the fire dragon's breath. Pushing his friend in the shoulder, the hunter waited for praise from him. The system continued to remind him of treatment. Hearing a strange sound, Kibben's eyes widened tensely. He turned around. His eyes sparkled. The reptile's body began to sparkle. Its heart was the place where a huge amount of energy was stored. The monster's eyes lit up. Its heart collapsed before the enemy spent most of its strength. As a result, the remaining energy in the dragon's body began to flow out at an incredible speed. The heroes opened their mouths in shock. A bright light illuminated their faces. The dead monster exploded. Sengren opened her mouth in surprise, hearing a strange sound. Standing in front of the dome, the employee reported that the energy of a fire dragon had been detected, which was the strongest of all the previous energy surges. Gritting her teeth, the girl wondered what was happening inside the dome. The boy standing behind her reported that the gathering of all ranks, except for those belonging to the Shield Guild, was over. People were looking at the glowing barrier intently. There were tanks outside, and the auxiliary firepower troops were also on guard. The woman pursed her lips. A sparkling spear appeared in her hand. Frowning furiously, she ordered the barrier to be destroyed and the troops to enter. Sengren brought her hand to the force field. It began to disappear. Suddenly, the dome crumbled into red particles. Spreading her fingers, the Prime Minister realized that the barrier had disappeared. The girl saw a small spark in front of her. The frightened people noticed how similar sparks began to fall from the sky. Someone raised his hand to catch it. The players watched in surprise. Yui's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at the sparks. The woman looked at the spark that fell in confusion. The reporter said it had started snowing. Frowning, Sengren realized it wasn't snow at all. She jumped up and ran forward. Looking back, her subordinate noticed his boss heading somewhere. The Prime Minister was confidently moving forward. It turned out that ash was falling from the sky. The girl continued to run towards the closed rift. Ahead of her was only the ruined land. Sternly knitting her brows, she hoped that her friend had survived. Dust rose above the ruins of the city. Suddenly, the woman stopped. Lowering her arms, Sengren tried to catch her breath. Leaning forward, the Prime Minister opened her mouth to catch her breath. Hearing sounds coming from under the rubble, the girl looked back. Raising her eyebrows in fear, she shouted out the name of her comrade. Having escaped from under the rubble, Kangui called his name. The heroes looked at each other in confusion and were silent for a while. The city was completely destroyed. The woman asked where Kibben was. The boy replied that he did not know. Raising his hand to his forehead, he noticed something ahead. The hunter waved his hand and called Sengren. The recruit pointed his hand at the protagonist. The awakened one put his index finger forward. The wounded guy was standing by the wall. The young man lowered his head because he had no strength. The Prime Minister raised her eyebrows. She opened her mouth in amazement. The girl stood in place for a while. Then the woman took a step forward. The player leaned against the wall, illuminated by a bright light. Sangren walked in his direction. The Prime Minister almost approached her comrade. She stopped right in front of him. Smiling, the girl praised her friend for a good job. The corners of her lips turned down. The protagonist remained silent. A smile appeared on his face. He sighed. The status window showed that he had only 1% of his health left. Military helicopters circled above the heroes. In the center of Seoul, in the Pangbi district, the Shield Guild office building towered. Someone ran down the corridor. A worried man ran into the boss's office. The director stood by the window and smoked a cigar. A subordinate reported that a reconnaissance team from the Fire Dragon's Nest had just contacted them and asked what they should do now. The old man took a drag and remained silent. He threw the cigar on the floor. The man headed for the exit of the office. The guild employee opened his mouth in amazement and called out to the boss. The director approached the door, continuing to remain silent. A blue sky hung over the city. The news began on the street screen. The presenter reported that the South Korean government officially announced that the cleanup of the 8th class rift was successfully completed. The screen showed an image of Sangren and the officials. The cleanup was done thanks to the tactics of the Ministry of Defense. Looking at the sheets of paper, the journalist said that an urgent message had arrived. The police had stormed the guild building. Law enforcement agencies announced that the vice leader of the Shield Guild and his henchmen had been arrested. The Prime Minister put her hand forward, ordering her subordinates to detain the villains. People led tear him out by the arms. The sin of the Shield Guild was very serious. All its members involved in what happened betrayed their country and were preparing to receive severe punishment. A seal was placed on the image of the guild leader. Law enforcement agencies announced James as a wanted person. A clear sky hung above the building. Blue clouds floated above the ODBC center. People were sitting in front of their laptops. The film crew was preparing for a live broadcast. There were many microphones in front of the girl. Smiling, the woman introduced herself and said that she was very glad that she survived and was now standing in front of them. A lot of flashbulbs appeared in front of him. Journalists wanted to know what really happened before the rift. Sangren raised her eyebrows and said that everyone already knew about the event from the news channels, and suggested that they were probably interested in the person who saved them. The Prime Minister stretched out her hand to the side. She closed her eyes and wanted to introduce her comrade. The girl pointed at the commander of the Special Rift Clearing Team. The protagonist sighed, lowering the corners of his lips. Kibben took a step forward. Scared of the cameras, he shrugged his shoulders. Smiling nervously, the guy greeted the audience. Looking up, the young man introduced himself to the cameras. There were huge satellite dishes outside. A bright light was on in the room. The player walked forward with his assistant. Someone called out to them. The heroes turned around. Holding a folder with documents in her hand, Jaein praised her comrades. Pointing at herself, Kangwei asked if she had seen his performance. The girl answered in the affirmative and praised him personally. Joyfully clenching his fist, the boy was simply delighted with what he heard. The main character grabbed him by the ear. The hunter closed his eyes. Kibben asked him to be quiet. Looking at them, the woman closed her eyes and left. Raising her eyebrows, the second lieutenant asked if this was their first time here. Looking to the side, the guy confirmed it. The heroes were standing in a huge laboratory. A bright lamp illuminated the strange installations. The young man squinted in disbelief. He approached his friend and called out to her. Jaein flinched when the player mentioned the people behind her. The TV channel staff had gathered in the room. The man was setting up the camera. The girl called her comrade a hero who saved the entire country. The main character frowned in displeasure. Smiling widely, the woman explained that these people were very interested in their savior. Kangwei clenched his fist. Stars were flying in front of him. Raising her hand to her mouth, the second lieutenant added that he was also considered a hero and that, according to rumors, he had his own fan club. The delighted boy asked if this was true. Covering his mouth, Kibben asked why he was called here. Raising her eyebrows, Jaein replied that it was necessary to conduct a test on his body. Introducing a muscular, shirtless guy, the girl explained that after he joined the military, they did not have the appropriate equipment to conduct the test, so the test data had not yet been entered into the headquarters database. There was a large computer against the wall. When the young man joined the military, the headquarters simply did not have measuring devices. Looking at his hand, the player remembered that the official test had never been conducted, so his data was not in the database, which made him free from human eyes. The main figures of the Shield Guild stood in front of their crest. If they had access to data on the Awakened, they would not have made such a mistaken decision. In the past, the protagonist knocked Cheol down. He managed to pin Taram to the ground. Grinning, Kibben laughed. Scratching the back of his head, he asked if he could take the test. Closing his eyes, the woman said that the person who was supposed to conduct the test had not yet arrived. Scratching his head, the guy wondered what this meant. A bright light came on in the corridor. The white cat raised its ears. Yui waved to the viewers and said that she had already arrived at her destination. A white kitten was sitting on her shoulder. Looking at her, the junior lieutenant said that this was the person responsible for testing. The girl approached the heroes. Extending her hand, she greeted them and introduced herself. The young man looked at her hand with distrust. He shook it and said his name. The girl shook his hand and said that she had been waiting for their personal meeting for a long time. Looking at his hand, the woman said that this was the hand of the hero who saved South Korea and called it beautiful. Squinting with disgust, the player suggested that they start the test as soon as possible. The streamer jumped several times and agreed. Pointing at the awakened one, Yui told the viewers that this was the long-awaited hero of South Korea and that they would now test him. Looking at Kwang-hee, the girl added that she would test him too. The boy clenched his fist. The heroes went to the test site. They entered a bright room. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. Raising her hand, she said that this test was very different from the one she had to take herself. There was a lever on the wall. Next to it was a special platform. Raising her eyebrows, Jun explained that it was very difficult to conduct an accurate test for her comrade, so they created new equipment. The junior lieutenant stood on the platform. She pulled the lever. Taking the handle in her hand, the girl suggested conducting a muscle strength test first and explained that if the old equipment could take measurements up to level A, then this machine is capable of recording measurements up to level S. Heroically landing on the platform, Yui said that she wanted to try the device first. A phone on a tripod was filming everything that was happening. Jun asked her colleague to take the device in her hand and squeeze it with all her strength. The girl took hold of the special handle. Her eyes widened. She decided to give it her all. The veins in her hand bulged from the strain. The machine with the wires started making strange sounds and glowing. Gritting her teeth, the woman with the glowing eyes decided to give it her all because her favorite viewers were watching her. Taking the tablet in her hands, the second lieutenant said that the measurements had been taken and that it was time to go down. Walking down the stairs, the huntress wondered how many points she had. Kangwee thought it was very funny. Showing the guys the tablet, Jian said that her colleague had received rank A like last time. Showing her biceps to the camera, Yui said that she never misses her training. While the heroes were fooling around in front of the camera, the protagonist approached the device. He took hold of a special handle. The second lieutenant asked him to squeeze it as hard as he could for a more accurate measurement. Worriedly knitting his brows, Kibben asked if everything would be okay. Putting her hand in her pocket, the girl asked him not to worry because this new equipment is made of a special material so it cannot break. Cutting her off mid-sentence, the boy clenched his fist and broke the handle, which shattered into small pieces. The huge machine began to hum and smoke. The woman opened her mouth in shock. The streamer's eyes widened in amazement. Kangwee's eyes sparkled with admiration. Smiling nervously, Jian asked how this could happen. Scratching the back of her head, the young man apologized. The second lieutenant fell to her knees. The people in the chat did not understand what was happening. The guys froze in place, puffing out their cheeks. The boy was upset that he would not be able to pass the test. The player struck the device created to test physical attacks, but it could not withstand his force and collapsed. The giant machine was smashed to pieces. The protagonist looked at his hand in surprise when the mana measuring machine broke right after he filled it with his energy. His friends' mouths opened in shock. The rookie pursed his lips in frustration, thinking that he should have gone first. Kibben apologized. Picking up a pile of wires, Jian explained that there was a problem with the equipment and said that the test went great. Yui agreed with her. The second lieutenant lowered her head. Smiling, the girl suggested changing the order of the procedures and moving straight to the interview since the testing went well to some extent. The guy frowned in excitement. The cameraman was looking at the camera. The film crew was sitting next to him. All the cameras and microphones were pointed towards the heroes. Smiling widely, the girl asked her friends to introduce themselves. On the screen, under the video, the name of the interview and the channel appeared. Now more than 100,000 viewers are watching the broadcast. Looking around, Kangwee asked where all these people were. Running up to the film crew, he began to look for them behind the boxes. Lifting him by the collar, the young man apologized. The player sat his comrade back on the chair. The woman covered her mouth with her hand to hold back her laughter. Looking at the guys, she asked if this was his concept or his real style. The main character looked away in embarrassment and replied that this was his real style. Sticking out his tongue, the boy said that he really liked steamed buns. Kibben asked him to be quieter. He sat down on a chair. Pointing at him with her hands, the streamer asked him to introduce himself again. Frowning, the guy greeted the viewers and called himself the captain of a special group for cleaning up rifts. Looking down, the young man became nervous because he did not know what age to tell him. The system suggested that at this point in time he was 30 years old. Lowering his hands, the player named this number. Putting his palms together, Yui said that her friend looked much younger than his age. The viewers could not believe that this was not a joke. Looking at his friend in surprise, the rookie said that he was much older. With a wide smile, the girl said that she wanted to ask the questions that all her viewers were interested in and asked how her comrade could be so strong. The main character frowned thoughtfully. The woman asked why he used his powers for their country and what his annual salary was. The streamer widened her eyes, waiting for an answer. Jian lowered her head tensely, realizing that her comrade was not using his powers for the country, but for revenge. Kibin sat silently on a chair and looked ahead. In the memory, he hugged his mother. The injured woman put her hand on his cheek. She ended up in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask. The guy did everything for her. The girls stared at him when the boy said that he had a family. The second lieutenant raised her eyebrows in surprise. Bringing the microphone to his mouth, the boy calmly continued the conversation, speaking slowly and clearly. The cameraman opened his mouth in amazement. The player looked away. The viewers in the chat were touched by his story. The main character looked at Yui. Tears were running down her cheeks. Seeing this, the film crew was very surprised that Yui was crying. The lieutenant saw this and was also surprised. "So that's it," she said to herself, closing her eyes. Covering her face with her hands, the streamer cried because she, just like Kibin, lost her family members to monsters. At the same time, in another place, in the house of one of the families watching this live broadcast, two people were sitting. They were having dinner. They were Yui's mom and dad. Looking at the TV, the woman said, "It's starting again." She suddenly started beating her chest, screaming that these mom and dad were now completely alive and well, and their daughter had betrayed them by putting them in the grave. The man adjusted his glasses and told his wife to stop because their daughter was popular, so she needed to play to the public because she was trying to do everything well. Yui wiped away her tears. The sun was shining brightly outside, and the father suggested leaving his daughter. After a while, a shout was heard in the studio that the interview was over. Everyone had done a great job. Yui approached the main character and said that he had also done well, to which the guy scratched the back of his head and replied that she had done well too. Kangwei sadly lowered his head and thought about the fact that he had not even been given the floor. Kibon flexed his fingers and asked if that was all. He looked at the confused Jian, who raised her hand to her chin, and said in his head that although he did not set this schedule, it was somehow awkward to say that he had other things to do. The lieutenant pointed at the streamer and said that she would tell him the rest. The protagonist lowered his hands and said that if that was all, then there was no need to manage his time anymore. He looked at the girls with a displeased look and said that it would be much better to clear another rift at this time. Juan laughed awkwardly and said that it was true, but she thought that something could help him. "Help?" the guy asked with disdain in his eyes. The lieutenant felt the protagonist's intimidating aura, after which she said that she made him a promise. Then Kibin remembered how a month after his return, the lieutenant found him and said that she would help him take revenge. She looked at him and said that she would help get rid of monsters and rifts. When the protagonist stopped, Juan called him with her, saying that they would find a way to end all this. Leaving the memories, Kibin silently looked at the girls and said to himself that these were Jian's words when she took him to her side. The protagonist did not take his eyes off her, saying in his head that he kept thinking that all these words were just so that he would go with her. Jian broke the silence, saying that all this time. She smiled and added, "They all tried so hard." The disdain disappeared from the protagonist's eyes. Without moving, he asked the girl what else they found out. A few minutes later, the thick metal doors opened. In front of them stood the protagonist, Jian, and Kangwei. Entering inside, Kibin saw a research center. Kangwei, looking around, was very impressed. There was a rift in one of the capsules. Not far from it were scientists who were developing something. Jian walked forward and called the protagonist to follow her. The guys came closer to the flask. The girl explained that a phenomenon such as a rift has many ambiguities that are difficult to explain from the point of view of modern physics. However, each time they managed to clarify more and more of these points. Kibin replied that everything is clear. Juan said that in order to clearly understand a phenomenon, you first need to know its energy. The guys frowned, looking at her in surprise. The girl said that they were conducting research on where the energy of the rifts comes from and how it is stored, and also thought that if it is possible to block the energy, then it will be possible to block the rift itself. She firmly added that they were able to get a small answer. The main character shouted, asking if the soldiers really understood how to block the rift. Juan shook her head, answering that it is still unknown. The girl turned to the side and asked to look there. Kibin turned around with interest. The system announced that in front of him was a fragment of an ancient stone. The guy whispered that it is a daystone. Juan asked in surprise if he knew about the daystone, to which the protagonist replied that he had heard of it. The girl said with a smile that Yui would tell him everything in detail, but there was a high probability that the rift that the guy would be exploring with the girl could contain the daystone. The protagonist coldly asked if she knew that too. Saiban was very surprised, because until now, the only thing he had been able to find while exploring rifts and killing boss monsters was the daystone. Juan replied that thanks to the byproduct that came out during the clearing of the Fire Dragon Rift. She turned to the side and added that they had the opportunity to make such an assumption. The girl said that now they considered the Daystone to be the most important item that could block the rift. The protagonist thoughtfully asked why he had to go with Yui, because couldn't they do everything one by one? Juin lowered her head in confusion, saying that the rift could only be activated by 3 people above rank entering it. She said that there weren't that many players they were in contact with. Frowning, she was afraid that if they asked a large guild for help, secret information might leak out. Kibben asked curiously if the people he would be going to the rift with were worthy of her trust. Juin nodded, saying that it was true. The girl said that a person who was close to the Prime Minister would be going with them, and all of these people could be trusted since it was Sengrin who gave Yui permission to hold a personal live broadcast. Her phone vibrated and she asked to wait. Juin took her phone out of her pocket and saw an incoming call from Yui. Suddenly, she said who was calling her. The girl smiled and asked if they could all go out and talk together. The sun was shining brightly outside. Kangwei jumped up and down, shouting that he wanted to go too. Kibben turned around and firmly answered, no. With tears in his eyes, the rookie asked why. The protagonist turned to the side and ordered him to look there. On the protective barrier, they read that only 3 people could enter the rift. So far, there was no one inside. The guy explained that more than 3 people could not enter. Kangwei waved his fists, shouting that if 3 people could enter, it would be him, Kibben, and 1 other person. The guys suddenly heard strange sounds from the side. Turning their heads, they saw a car flying towards them. It fell to the ground, making loud impact sounds. The dust began to dissipate quickly. The door immediately swung open. Raising the camera up, Yui happily said that today she had a date in the rift with the hero Kibben. The chat was happy, writing that the real game was beginning. The protagonist said that she should go with them, when suddenly Kangwei interrupted him, shouting that there were only 2 of them. The other door of the car suddenly swung open. Kibben menacingly replied that there were 3 of them now. The guys were walking from the side of the car. Kangwei lowered his head down in disappointment. The 4 of them suddenly met. The guy extended his hand forward. Kangwei stepped aside, squatting down. Yuben extended his hand towards the protagonist, saying, nice to meet you. With a smile on his face, he introduced himself, saying that he was the guild master of the H-Warring Guild. Yuben is the guild master of the H-Warring Guild, and 10 years ago, when the rift was first discovered in the world, as the first awakened, he, along with Prime Minister Sangrian, slept South Korea. He was one of the heroes of the fatherland. Currently, Yuben extended his hand to the protagonist. The guy looked at him and said to himself that this is the person Jian was talking about. Yuben stared at the protagonist, who was saying to himself that he was the Prime Minister's colleague. After a short pause, Kibben shook his hand. After that, he looked him in the eye and introduced himself as the commander of the Special Task Force for clearing the rifts, and then added that he hoped that they would get along. At this time, Yui started the live broadcast and exclaimed that they had content with Kibben and Yuben today. She moved the camera to the wall, on which it was written that 3 players were needed to enter the rift, and then finished saying that she was going to clear the rift. Pointing her hand at the guys, she asked the viewers if they were also interested in how outstanding the hunting skills of the hero Kibben, who cleared the nest of the fire dragon, were. The protagonist, hearing this, became worried. Yui pointed the camera straight at him and said that it was the rift they would be clearing today. She moved the camera to a dense forest and added, Moth Camera, a 6th class rift, which is famous for its difficulty among this class. Then the streamer moved the camera to her comrades, whose faces expressed different emotions, and said that she, with only 3 people, was entering a 6th class rift for the first time. Moving the cameras to herself, she said with a wide smile on her face that since there were 2 more with her, she should not worry. Viewers in the chat wrote that they were very interested in who would appear this time, adding that they should be more careful. After reading this, Yui brought her hand to her face and said upset that she would not be able to continue her live broadcast in the rift. Having said this, she waved her hand and said that they were done with this and would see each other after the clearing. The viewers wished the guys good luck. A few seconds later, Yui pressed the end button. After that, the girl lowered the phone. Suddenly, she turned around abruptly and exclaimed that she was very grateful to the protagonist for coming. With a wide smile on her face, she asked if Jian had told him everything. Kibben nodded and said yes. After saying this, he looked away. The guy remembered how the lieutenant put her finger up and asked him to take out the Daystone, adding that although she trusted Yui and Yuben, he should be the one to do it. After leaving the memories, the 3 of them stood next to each other. Looking at them, the protagonist thought that it would be better if he took out the Daystone himself. His comrades stared at him. Kibben pointed his finger towards the rift and asked if they wanted to go inside. Yes, Yui exclaimed happily, raising her hand. Kangwei was sitting to the side with tears in his eyes. The protagonist saw him and called him. Without taking his eyes off him, he ordered them to return to the squad, adding that if he had any doubts, he should first discuss it with his deputy. Hearing this, the guy lowered his head in disappointment and quietly said, okay. The girl's foot stepped forward. The guys slowly approached the rift. They looked forward seriously. There was not a single person inside. A few seconds later, the three guys entered inside. Mana began to appear around their feet. Their bodies rose up, shrouded in magic. They carefully watched what was happening. A huge stream of mana glowed with a bright light. The protective barrier suddenly disappeared, leaving dust behind. Magic immediately hit the ground with all its force. The guys' bodies shifted and the system reported that they had entered a 6th class rift, the Moth Chamber. Because of the dissipating dust, they looked forward. Kibin turned back, asking if it was time to start for real. The guys frowned and looked at Yui. The girl grabbed the camera, saying that since they don't know what might happen inside the rift, she can't use a selfie stick, and besides, this isn't a live broadcast. Yubin said in confusion that she has a precise professional mentality, to which the girl replied in a trembling voice that they can go now. There was complete silence inside the rift. The guys carefully walked forward. The guys walked calmly, while Yui happily jumped forward. Yubin looked to the side and said, "Strange." The girl turned back and asked embarrassedly, what was strange? The guy noted that they had entered the rift quite a while ago, but in all this time they hadn't met a single monster. Yui asked if that was bad, because she thought it would be enough if she filmed them catching the boss mob. Yubin grabbed the handle of his weapon, saying that it was important. He explained that there were a lot of flying monsters in the Moth Chamber from the very beginning, and this was already the initial middle zone of the rift field, but not a single monster had shown itself yet. The girl waved her hand and asked what of it. With a smile, she pointed at the protagonist, saying that they had a hero who had cleared the 8th class rift, so there was no need to worry about anything. Yubin nodded, saying yes, of course. Yui happily asked if they should continue on their way, because there was still a long way ahead. It was a bright evening outside. After some time, the sky darkened. The protagonist stepped forward. All three of them stopped abruptly. Kibin thought that they had entered inside in the morning, however, it felt like not much time had passed. The girl said that the Moth Chamber had short days and still very deep nights, so it was not easy to move in the dark. Yubin added that the Moth Chamber was very large in size and would take 3 days to walk around it, so he thought they should call it a day and stop here.